Hello, everyone. I'm so excited. We are back. Hi, I'm Trooper SJP, and this is Gamer Stories, where we hang out together. I have to move my chat over so I can see you all better, in your beauteous faces, everyone in the community. So we can talk about gaming. And let me move this here. Yeah. Oh, you know what? I'm this way. I'm still over here. I'm like, which way do I look? I'm here. This is where we're at. Wait, but hold on. Go ahead, tell me something.
Tell you something.
You're here. Perfect.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Trooper SJP, and this is Gamer Stories, which is a thing that I wanted to do where we bring somebody in and they talk about their gaming history, and then we can all just chat together about the things that are interesting and relevant. And the gamer I have for today is Barantor, who's been a member of the community for quite some time. But some things that I know about Barantor, which made me want to have him on here with us, is that, and I'm going to, thank you, Sal, I'm going to turn him up a little bit, is that Barantor has been gaming for ages and ages. Barantor, like me, is a veteran. And I think that's really interesting because we can talk a little bit about gaming in the military, which is, because I think sometimes people don't think about that. It's a different gaming trajectory, but also from North Carolina. Yes. Kentucky. And so we can talk about what gaming is like in Kentucky. So there's just a lot going on that we can talk about. I've always been impressed by Barantor's knowledge of the happenings in the tabletop world. What is that website that you go to all the time? I go there and I haven't been there in a while. What's it called? It's not Waypoint.
InWorld? No.
Well, InWorld is one, but there's another one that has good gaming news.
I get most of my news from InWorld. Lately, I don't know which one you're talking about. What letter does it start with?
I'm gonna have to remember it again, because I've got like a whole list of ones that I go through. Somehow.
I go down the list, yeah.
I'm just turning you up a little bit, Barantor, just so you know.
Yeah, I can move things around if I need be too. So
that sounds a little bit better, I think.
Cool.
So, Barantor.
Yes.
Thank you for being here. I'm excited.
I'm excited too.
So,
I'm nervously excited. I'm like, what is he going to ask me now? Oh no!
Wait, I'm going to ask you all the questions. I just a bit quick. Can you all hear him right now? It's good right now. Good. Okay.
There's good. Okay.
I think it's good.
I don't speak very loud naturally, and so I could move things around if it gets light.
And I'll just give you a tad more volume.
Okay.
So tell me, when did you first hear about role-playing games? Like, how old were you? Where were you? And what was the context of that?
Well, I heard about role-playing games on the old D&D cartoon. That was my first, okay, there's something called Dungeons and Dragons. I don't know what that is, but there's something out there called Dungeons and Dragons. And then around that time, everything was pretty nice in my life. I was very young. So, you kind of watch cartoons and then do the normal thing. But then, I didn't think too much about it. And then one day I went into the store, and I always liked swords and sorcery. And at an early age, I read The Hobbit pretty early. I remember my mother actually going, you can actually read that? I'm like, yeah. And then I read it, so it was no big deal. And then I have show and tell. So I found this game, and it's a game that many people know if you're in the US. And a lot of people in Europe know it too, but it is, let's see if we can get in there.
Oh, Hero Quest.
I'm trying not to spill it too, because the box is about done, but there it is. And so I ran into that. So that was my, I got that. It came with minis, it comes with the little map and everything else. To me, that was what D&D was, obviously, because it's supposed to be really similar to that. Everybody I talked to that had played it said, oh yeah, it's like D&D, but a board game. So I'm like, oh, cool. Oh, all right. Young me was like, yeah, gung-ho. Found people to play it with, and that sort of thing. And that led to reading the back. I lived out in the country. And so when you live out in the country and you don't have things like internet and a lot of TV channels or anything to do, video games were kind of that thing that was expensive that I didn't really get to do a lot of, except for arcade and whatnot. We weren't exactly rich or anything either. So, but I saved up for that, and I read it front to back like 3 times. Read all the box, read the back, and then I started looking for information about what that company was. I knew Milton Bradley. It's a combination of Milton Bradley and Games Workshop. There was this company called Games Workshop. If you know what, and those of you that don't know what Games Workshop is, if you've ever heard of Warhammer, either the Space Marine games or the Warhammer Fantasy, Vermintide 2 is the new game that just had some beta release. They made all of that. That was their purview. It was a British-based gaming company. A lot of people consider it the kind of British version of D&D. In the U.S. we had Dungeons and Dragons, and that spread all over. And England got that too. The UK got it, but they had their own kind of homebrew team that was Games Workshop. They had White Dwarf magazine and all those good things. And so, you've probably got a couple back there somewhere.
I do.
Okay. Yes.
There's my White Dwarf magazine.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's a very good issue if I remember right too. It's just funny. Yeah. And so I would absorb that. So I had heard that from a friend at school that, there is this gaming store in Lexington, which was to me a big metropolis. I live there now, right? But to me, living out in the country, it's anything that's more than a couple or a little town that we were close to was a big metropolis. And so there was a gaming store. It was called the Rusty Scabbard. It still exists. And I went into it with the knowledge that I was going to get something maybe for my Hero Quest game. I think I was, I must have been 12 years old. And I walked in there. It was everything that is stereotypical about gaming stores. Was beards, kind of a little bit of funk going on, mismatched items, old stock, new stock, dust on stuff, random tables and chairs that don't match at all whatsoever.
And trees, like fake trees, right?
Fake trees, all sorts of wargaming material, bags of random things just kind of placed there, and you're like, okay, I could buy that, I guess. And then I went through and I found a book, and this is, we'll get into this in a minute, I'm sure, but later on, there was a revelation in my life between me and my mother as far as role-playing games. I'll leave that for a minute, but I was able to get this out. And this is the one thing I've had the full length, I would say, of anything. I lost a lot of other things, but I picked up this book, this exact book.
Oh, wow.
And this is the first edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. And a lot of other people started with Dungeons and Dragons, but I started with this thing because of Hero Quest. That was that was the lead up into it. I was reading any fantasy book I could get a hold of. I was messing around with Hero Quest. I painted that Hero Quest box, by the way, is not the original one I had. So we'll get into that later maybe. But this one is the one I have stuck with. I've played it a couple times since it's kind of gone out of favor because it's old now, or whatever. But I've gotten the new book back there somewhere too. Yes, actually right here. Let me get it. Here is the newer version of the same game. Very much a throwback, all the art and whatnot.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was kind of my impetus into it. Now I had friends that would try to get me to play AD&D, which was the D&D of the time, as I knew it, and I found it lacking, I guess is the word. After you've played something that has hit locations and different stacking of armors and all, just AC doesn't, THACO doesn't, AC doesn't do it, and so I wanted a different game that what they were playing. I played with them, and a few times I could get into town to play. Those became fewer and fewer as we go along with our story here, but that was kind of my first, to answer your question, that's how my impetus into the RPG world. It's
interesting because I think for a lot of people of our generation, right, UI, Krellinger, there are a bunch of us, in our Gen Xers who don't exist, for whom, your first experience is probably going to have been AD&D, just Yes. Or maybe the red box, but that's probably going to be your first gaming experience. And from there, you move to something different. And then for you having started actually with Warhammer, that's interesting. I mean, I know some people started with other things, but often, right? Because that was the game in town.
the big, anytime I went to school, it was all just Dungeons and
Yeah.
Dragons. It didn't matter what you played. Later on, when other things came out, that might have. I remember there being some superhero games that came along, and
Yeah.
even that, oh, it's D&D, but it's superheroes.
Yeah.
So that's the clean, like we've talked before in the Discord. It's the Kleenex of role playing games kind of thing. It's not called tissue paper. It's called just Kleenex because that's what it's all called.
It's true.
Yeah.
Krellin says, I know I started with the red box, but honestly, I don't know how I came to have it. That's an interesting question. You went to your game store, right, to get it?
Mm-hmm.
I went to the game store. It was called Game Masters, and I would go in, and I was just like, I didn't buy anything because you don't have any money. You're a kid, but I would just look at all the stuff.
See, I'd saved up birthday money for and any money that I could gain from like mowing yards and doing various things. And I had to like beg my grandmother to take me because it was all the way downtown and it was on campus, because we have the University of Kentucky here. And so, I had to go on. And of course it was on campus because that was the college kids were going to it. And that's probably the majority of their money was coming from college students. But, and so they drove us down. Or she drove me down and waited in she didn't even want to go in. It was so 12-year-old me goes into this like store by myself and comes back out. I'm giddy, and she's like, "Oh, you bought a book? That's good." And then
little did she know.
She had no idea. She didn't care. She was like, "Oh, I'm making my grandson happy," and that was the good thing. So
I got mine. What I got was the red box, and I got it from Toys R Us, and it was on sale.
Nice.
So I got it for like $7. So like I'd saved up my $7 and I got the red box and it was like half off from Toys R Us. And when I saw that it was on sale, I was like, okay, I can do this, right? And then like, like, back then you had the dice, but they also came with the wax pencil so that you could
crayon. The
wax crayon so you could put the numbers on your plain sad looking dice.
I've heard those dice don't hold up very well. Like they get a little bit rounded to the edges and stuff too, which is
and like fall apart to powder. You're like, what? I guess.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Yeah.
Levi says that I had to hide D&D books from my grandma. Devil almost got me. Oh, Satanic Panic, my friends.
See, my grandmother was a socialite, so she didn't care. She didn't care a whim. No, she didn't care a whim.
Did the Satanic Panic hit you in Kentucky?
Hard, very hard. So it was probably the late 80s, early 90s when and this coincides with a couple events in my life. So my parents divorced when I was at 12, almost 13. And my father went to Woodstock. He's like big hippie, type thing. My mother had come from a very conservative Catholic family and had come to college and then met this man and then married him. And as soon as he was gone, she kind of reverted back to her previous ways because that's what she knew.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden it was very churchy in our household. Some people like church. I have some resentments toward church because of such things that happened. She took a lot of stuff. She didn't get this. This is the thing. She snuck this by. But I remember her looking at it one time and asking me some very detailed questions on the demonologist and stuff that was inside of it. And then I snuck it away from her and hid it away. But some of my other stuff did not meet a good end, including the original Hero Quest that I had. And at that point, I had saved up and bought the majority of the expansions for it and stuff, and it's all gone. So so I tend to be very clingy with things that I have because of this. She eventually sent me to a Christian high school, and I spent a couple of years. I did not want to, but I did spend there, and so it was a little rough going there for a while, and that was an issue that my mother and I have actually only recently begun to kind of. She stays out of my business is really what.
We have a line.
I've gotten 40. She could stay out of my business.
Were there gamers at your Christian high school or no?
There were, and that was the irony, is that I could play games at lunch with my friends that I had made there. We didn't get to play too often, because it was, lunch, school takes precedence over everything. Yeah. But I surely didn't mention it to my mother. My grandmother was kind of opposed to my mother at this time, and we lived next door to her. And so it was kind of an interesting dichotomy that I grew up with, because it's like, adults can know things, but also can be very wrong. And my grandmother kind of instilled that with me, which is why I love my grandmother so much. She's been gone for a long time, but she was an awesome lady. So props to her.
She sounds amazing. We
It was very good.
we talked a little bit in the various discords about sort of the stigma of being a gamer at the time.
Yeah.
And it's funny, right? Because I feel like there was no one knew about it. Like there's a point in time when no one knew about it, so then you kind of didn't have a stigma because no one knew what it was. But then people knew that it was the devil, so then you did have a stigma, or they knew that just only nerds did it. So it was this kind of weird moment where either people knew and had negative associations of different sorts, or didn't.
Yeah, and that's one thing I wanted to actually talk about with you, because I was thinking about this strongly the other day, and I think it's something that only a certain age group, us Gen Xers, I guess, is that kind of grew up with. I call it revenge of the nerds. I hate the word nerd and it's because of some bad bullying that happened when I was younger, and that happened, and that was the thing. Is that there was a stereotype of nerddom, right, and you were it was unmasculine to do those things. It was not you were in that brainiac group or whatever, and you were meant to be picked on. It was you were open season for anyone else. Now I had to kind of double down, because I not only had the normal like jock mentality types that would do that, but we also had a lot of rural people that didn't understand anything, and so now you're very kind of in your own little groups. So there were a few of us, and it was almost like the secret society type of thing, where you didn't really talk about it around certain people, because that might be bad for you socially, or maybe even physically, depending on who was finding out about it, or who wanted to pick on you at the time. There's all those stereotypes of the time about like the drama club being together, and like we were talking about before, kind of in chat about Vampire. And then there were the people that were the computer nerds at the time. I had the opportunity, because my uncle was an electrician for a gas company, and he liked computers, and he was very into electronics, and he actually gave me a Commodore 64 really early.
Oh, wow.
So that I was able to learn some things on that, and I would share those experiences with other people. But there's only a certain little group, and especially when you're rural, that you can share those experiences with, with your peers at that age. And I think that that is something that's lost now, because we take technology for so much granted, because it's intrinsically in everyone's lives, whether you kind of like it or not. And then also those social stigmas don't exist. And so I think we've talked about this too. There's kind of an old gamer, and this happens very prevalently in OSR communities. There's a resentment for the new gamer, because the old gamer feels like they took their licks, to kind of get things in this situation, and they don't feel appreciated for having had gone through that or whatever. I'm not of that mind. It sucked, but and I can share my experiences with people like now, but like I'm not going to hold it against someone because they're new to a game. That seems
get closer to the mic for me if you don't mind.
Sorry. Yes.
Because I want you close to the mic, and it's funny because I think that it's. I mean, I think that. So I was talking to somebody, thinking about stigma and nerdness, right? Mm-hmm. There was a person who was like, "I'm a nerd, and so therefore I'm an outsider." This was just a couple years ago, and I was like, "Oh, all right. What makes you a nerd?" And he said, "Well, I like superheroes." And I was like, And he's like, "And I like video games." And I was like,
Yeah.
That's exactly what everybody likes right now. Like, if you look at if you took the top films, they're superhero films, and everybody's playing video games on their phone.
Right.
And I was just, and like he was using the nerdness. He was using it as a cover, because he was being really misogynistic. And yeah, I mean, he was like, women are the worst. He was saying these awful things, and I was like, hold on a second, wait a minute. And he's like, no, it's fine because I'm a nerd. And I was like, no, first off, no. But also liking, as you said, that like, the things that were at one point in time very marginal are getting Oscars, right? Like they're not.
Yeah, and the whole like the comic books, comic books were in that sort of subculture. They kind of came that kind of reversed earlier than the RPGs did.
Yeah,
I remember very distinctly in school. all of a sudden comic books were back, and this was like mid 90s
Yeah.
or so.
I think it was when Mouse got the Pulitzer Prize, right? Then all of a sudden people were like,
yeah,
oh, maybe.
yeah, and then there was a new push by Marvel to get a lot of newer, younger artists that weren't these old Silver Age people or whatever, and things turned around like that. And I think RPGs have turned around like that too. We've got, TSR is long gone.
Yeah.
I mean, there's TSR is gone. There's no more of that. Wizards of the Coast did their thing at the early 90s, tried some things. Fourth edition, they kind of tripped up a little bit. Now they've kind of hit their stride again. And so things change over time. And you either accept that and move on, or you kind of hold your guns and try to I'm only going to live in the past, which a very conservative kind of attitude. Yeah. But, as long as you're not degrading other people, then who cares? But if you're going to hold it against someone, then yeah, that's the point at which I have a problem with that.
Carlin was saying that he didn't remember hating girls ever being any part of my gamer circles, his gamer circles. And what I think is interesting is that we're in a moment now where there's a lot of discussion of what it was like back then by people who were not back then, or how they're describing what it was like back then is not how I remember it.
Not accurate. Or they have sort of a rose-colored. Well, it's like we see all this retro 80s stuff, and it's like, oh, it was not a fabulous time.
No, the 80s were kind of awful. They were not the best time.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I look back and I'm like, okay, you're cherry picking the good parts out and kind of reformatting it into this new thing, and that's fine, I guess. But don't sweep all that stuff to the side and say, oh yeah, the 80s were great, because they were not.
No, and it's actually B. Boodle saying being female liking gaming and comic books was odd. Yeah, and they tried, I think, in moments. I remember there were a couple of comic books that were aimed more towards women, perhaps, and there were things. But it was, it's funny. I was just thinking about the OSR, and one thing that's always, and I know why, I know what this is about, I get it, but it always still bugged me. And the one thing that kind of bugged me about the OSR is that it's about the old school, but it's only about Dungeons and Dragons, and there were other games back then as well that were not Dungeons and Dragons. And look, I understand that it's because Dungeons and TSR Wizards, they
dominant.
They have made that open source so that you can then use it.
Right.
But it's just weird because there were other games.
Yeah, right? There were a lot of other games. Yeah. There were other games.
Yeah. I mean, or even what is it? Stars Without Number is an OSR. And it's yeah, you're using D&D to do Traveler.
That's basically what they. Yeah. And I understand that there's a throwback to it, right?
Yeah.
It's a mentality of old school, but
welcome back, Cyclonus.
It's a very weird application of what, and I both like and hate the OSR community. I like parts of it that are trying to innovate off of the old feel and trying to bring back some maybe that game simulation type stuff. Fine, great. Yeah. But then there's also a component that has that conservative mindset and wants to think bad. Yeah. It wants to bring back parts of that gaming store that I walked into when I was 12 that I don't want any part of now.
Yeah.
Or anyone to experience.
Yeah.
And those are the things that I think are really bad about that thought. And of course, the thing where they only seem to focus on Dungeons and Dragons, and every now and then someone will mention it in Reddit and stuff on the OSR, and they'll be like, "Oh, but that's just what we do." And I think it's kind of a follower mentality at some point that happens with that. But I can't change it personally, so I think I just kind of go with the flow of it, bring in the good parts, ignore the bad parts, try to talk down the bad parts. Hey, take this stuff out. That's no bueno type of thing. So.
What do you think about this? Here's a question that I have, which it's because this based on what you were just saying.
Yeah,
I was thinking about Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition,
right?
As OSR, right? As trying to bring back certain kinds of feelings from the past. Clearly not everything. For example, it's not nearly as deadly. Right, but trying to, after the 4th edition, trying to return to a particular kind of earlier Dungeons & Dragons feeling. And of course, no one would ever describe 5th edition as OSR, ever. They would never do it. But what do you think about because people did say things like, oh, 5th edition is going back to its roots. Now, of course, that was also weird because 5th edition and 1st edition are really nothing like each other at all.
No, no.
But people described it that way, and I was
Well,
wondering what you thought.
it depends on what your roots are,
Yeah.
right? So if your roots are Red Box or AD&D,
Mm.
and you're probably going to go, wow, you're probably gonna be like, but if your roots were 3rd edition, those roots, it's very much, it's taking the good bits out of that, trimming all the excess fat, and a lot of the unnecessary numbers in a way that people felt that were in it. A lot of the complexity, which could be a good thing or a bad thing depending on where you apply it. I think it's overall done better, and obviously it's doing better in sales, but calling it OSR is a weird, and that's a weird thing too, is because OSR kind of applies differently to different people, right?
Yeah. Like, what do we mean by that? Like, what
is your old school?
Yeah.
Right. What is your and I'm assuming that yours is probably different than mine. Mine's obviously not anything to do with Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. I also think, because I think basically, I don't think we have people that are much older than us here, but I have people that I'm gaming with for whom I was young when they were playing, right? Like, I was 12. When I was 14, I got into a gaming group of people who were old. Right. So they were probably 24.
They're adults.
they were adults, and I was, in high school. So they are just old enough that they were gaming in the 70s, right? So like for them,
and that's in the 70s seemed like it's a whole different set of numbers that you had the kind of the 70s group, you had the early 80s group, you had the late 80s group. The 80s group kind of bled into the 90s, and then there was a definitive time, TSR's loss and Wizards of the Coast takeover is kind of a definitive time for a lot of things, because a lot of trends were following Dungeons and Dragons, and then all of a sudden there's a whole new set of trends by a dominant, dominant force in the industry. So it's interesting, and it's one of those things that I think we've talked about at length on Discord about how people theorize how different things could happen and whatnot. But you look at history, and there's a lot of different OSRs.
Yeah, and I think about like my friends for whom they're playing D&D in 77, right? 76.
Before I was born.
Right, but and they're playing maybe Empire of the Petal Throne, like they're playing some other games that are old that I don't even know, or I know of but have never seen, and what gaming seems like to them is different from me, for whom when I'm coming into gaming, there's not just one or two games, there are now game stores, right? Like, and like I'm just at that sort of a transition where when I first started, most of the places you would get gaming books were not in they were in hobby stores, right, with a lot of model trains and balsa wood airplanes.
And in the back corner there would be these books, and you would get them, and you would have D&D and any other RPG, and then you have a book about how to paint a Messerschmitt properly or something weird. It's like sitting right next to it or mixed in with the pack, and you're like, what the hell is this doing here?
What are these Jane's guides doing here, right?
Lots of Jane's guides. They have, honestly, most of the time the GURPS books were next to the Jane's guides.
They were.
I guess that's kind of relevant. I mean, sure.
Yeah, and then of course we started getting actual hobby stores,
right?
And so it was like an interesting. And then of course Dungeons and Dragons blows up. All of a sudden there's a cartoon and a breakfast cereal. Although wait, that was Pac-Man that had a breakfast cereal.
Right.
But
yeah, I don't know if Dungeons and Dragons had breakfast cereal. Maybe. I know it had action figures.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff,
yeah.
But and then it all just sort of, and then of course it wasn't just Dungeons and Dragons. TSR was doing Star Frontiers and everything.
That was the TSR bloat era where they had 30 different settings and 30 different book series that you could get, Mystara and Spelljammer and all those.
Right.
And nobody played the same thing, and everybody had 30 different books about D&D that nobody could agree on what to play.
Yes. I had a Gripply character who got powers when a piece of spaceship crashed in his swamp. Oh, that's cool. And then the old school D&D model that was adventurous exploring a crashed alien spaceship. I remember I didn't play it though. The TSR Wizards of the Coast change was only one drop in the bucket, really. The buyout was the result of the downward trend in RPG sales. This is also when White Wolf started working on the video game market to subsidize poor sales. Yeah. Oh yeah, and you actually can make swords and shields into good marshmallows. That's true.
Star was the first, original D&D setting, not the first Gygax setting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
but then of course the books, right? That's like I'm thinking about the novels. The Dragonlance novels were really big. So like there was quite a lot of
fantasy fiction writing wise exploded in the late 80s too. You had everybody, I brought some of those books. Maybe I did. Maybe they were, Terry Brooks, Ursula Le Guin, those type of things. I was reading those and get my fix for fantasy stuff. It was. I think it hit a point at which the bloat for TSR was just too big in the early 90s, and then that started their downward, like Jair was saying, the downward trend kind of that. There was too much to buy and not enough people to buy it because it had come off the Satanic Panic, and then they exploded at the product range, and then that was when a lot of little companies started moving in, and that was interesting too. And all of a sudden, Vampire the Masquerade was a thing. And what is that?
I remember when that happened. I was like, oh.
Yes. Yeah, I very much remember that too. And it was very much going back to those stereotypes, the goth crowds thing. If you were in drama club and you were a goth, that was your jam, and not mine, because I didn't very much like vampires. And I was still very much thinking that my gamist roots would continue forever, and I would just have all the games would be gamist, and then this was the subset that was fine for other people, but not for me, and yada yada.
All hell FASA, says Cyclonus. I was actually introduced to Vampire when I was in the army, so I didn't get to.
You're a little bit older than I am, so you were before I was. Yeah.
So it wasn't goths because we were in the army, right? So my context was not drama kid goths. It was army people playing vampires. So that was a slightly different. Right. And I was also overseas, right? So I wasn't in the States.
Yeah, that probably had some effect on it too. Do you think that affected what you were came in contact with, as far as I don't think the PX over there would stock did it stock Dungeons and Dragons? I don't know.
No. What was so weird was that I don't know what it was like for you, but for me, military gaming was this really interesting thing of, you go into basic training, you can't take much with you. Right after you finish basic, you can end up getting a couple of things once you go off to advanced training or wherever. So you have all of these people who have, you bring that, and I brought my GURPS basic book. Right. Somebody brought Warhammer. I was playing with somebody who brought their Rollmaster book. So everybody brought
whatever could fit in your sea bag.
And it was the one book that you were going to bring. You can't bring everything. So what are you going to bring?
Couldn't bring Hero Quest, unfortunately,
and so then we had a weird mix of things, right? Because people brought the one thing that was most important to them for their gaming book. So it was a really varied. I played. It was when I joined the army that I played the most variety of games up till then. Before then, it was mostly D&D, and then I moved to GURPS and was playing mostly GURPS and Call of Cthulhu. But once I hit the army,
that's interesting, because that's exactly the same with me. Yeah, I never really thought about that. Yeah, I don't think I played quite as many different games as I did. Living rurally, you don't really come into contact with, you're getting into town to visit friends was a thing, So the kids that were in town, of course, they had a variety, more time to play, more time to interact with each other and things. So it wasn't that I would have to spend the night at somebody's house really to play. And so that was usually a weekend type thing. But yeah, that's I had never really thought about that, but I had very much got exposed to a lot of different games. I was stationed in Southern California, so it was big city for me. It was much different, and I had that with me. But then my first roommates were outranked me, older than me. One of them was about to get out, and he was running AD&D, and that was the first time I think you can play a game with some people, and you might not really play it, especially when you're young, and then there's a time when you really play it. Yeah. And I think that was the first time I really, really sat down and played a full campaign type of scenario.
I know that difference between playing it and then really playing it. When you start really absorbing it.
Getting, deep dive into it with people that know what, and you kind of get in that circle of people that know what they're doing, know the ins and outs of the system, and teach you how to manipulate it and play at a different type of level than maybe if you're just sitting and looking at a book going, I think we roll this now. on on the floor at 3 o'clock in the morning when you're
the errors we made.
And
Curlin asked if I ever got into the Dark Eye since I was stationed in Germany, and when I was in Germany, I never got to play it. I was always interested in the Dark Eye. Like, I knew about it because I was like, oh, that's the German D&D. I want to play it, and I never got around to playing it until the year before last, I think it was, or last year. They came out with the English translation, and I played it at Gen Con, and I was like, oh my god. No, like, what are you doing? This is crunchy in a way that is not elegant. Like, I don't mind crunch. Like, I enjoy a good crunch, but I want the crunch to be elegant, right? So
you wanted to have the flow, a playability factor, if you will, that some games just throw out the window and throw more numbers at you.
Yeah. There was, I think, that if I remember correctly, so you have like a bunch of different stats and like your ability scores, and there are a bunch of them. And to do anything, you have to assemble 3 different D20s, and what they are is not intuitive. Like with White Wolf, it's one attribute, one skill, and you can kind of mix and match it. Like if you're trying to do something intellectual about guns, you could put intellect and guns together, firearms, and to know sort of knowledge about guns or something, and then you're fine. But this was not that. This was like, well, for initiative, you should probably do dexterity twice, and then also perception once, and then to do a history check, you should do history, intelligence, but then also maybe body. I don't know. Really weird things that I don't quite understand why they put them together and why sometimes the same attribute was doubled. I don't know. And then you roll them, and you have to hit a target number with each of those ones. So like this one is your intellect. This one's your other intellect. This one is your, and like what about you hit that? It was, and like you couldn't memorize what the roll combos were for each task. So you always had to look up on the chart each time. And I was like, this is not
if you have to look at a chart too many times, that's when you start losing me quickly. I'm like, if I have to look up a bunch of stuff, I mean, yeah. And
I like crunch, but I want the crunch to be to make sense, right? And to be
intuitively playable is what I would.
Yes.
Yeah.
Krellin was saying that the best convention session he was ever in was Rollmaster. I enjoyed it when I was playing it. I haven't played it since then though, so it's been almost 30 years since I played Rollmaster.
Yeah, and I think Krellin was the one that tried to get me to play Shadowrun at one point, and this latest version, and I was just like, I can't. A little bit too much going on for me. I tried to read through it. I think my problem was I tried to read through it in order and confused myself halfway through, and then reread it, and then reread it again, and then asked some questions, and then those didn't make any sense. But why? But I don't know. Maybe this new Shadowrun will be more palatable, I guess.
I've heard some things.
I've heard some things too, and I don't know if that's going to be true or not.
Levi asked, when deciding what RPG book to bring when we went off to the military, were we thinking at all in respect to what other people would bring, or a game you didn't want to be without?
For me, it was more Satanic Panic worry, because I knew as soon as I took off, anything that I left could be in, and it did. It ended up in the trash heap.
Really?
Yes.
Parents, come on.
I got one suitcase. I hid this. I took with me. I also have a suitcase full of comic books, and there's another expansion for the Warhammer that I didn't take with me that I hid in a suitcase in my closet. And she never got a hold of that one. So
wow,
it's kind of weird. But yeah, as far as that answering Levi's question, it was more I didn't want that to get thrown out. So that was what I was thinking. And that's what I know. And I know that backwards and forwards, whereas other people know like can do Thaco and recite tables from Redbox and stuff. And I'm like, no, I don't know any of that. So
it's interesting because my dad, his mother had thrown out his baseball cards when he was when he left for the military, baseball cards that now would be worth $80 bazillion. And so my parents were very good at not throwing out my stuff because they're like, we know what that's like. So that was really good. I will say for me, it was very simple. The GURPS 3rd edition, one book, and with that one book I could play anything. So I was like, all I need is this one book and I'm good. So for me it was a very practical thing. It wasn't, what will people not bring, but it was more like, if I have this one book, I can run anything, and I only like, because what was I going to do? Bring the player's guide, DMG,
Right.
and monster manual? That's like 3 books, but this was just
Right.
one. So for me, it was about just, I would have to bring fewer things.
And I remember when I was in, third edition came out, and I bought all 3 of those books, and I was like, these are kind of cool, and I knew enough tertiary material about Dungeons and Dragons to read through it and understand. But there was a whole group that bought it together, and we started playing it, and it was very interesting because we all had different angles of where we came in at. Some of them were very much they would be very like, I haven't talked to them in a long time, but several of them would fit in really well. Now they were narrative forward. The stats, the sheets over there, I don't have to roll, and then there were some that were, oh, so gamist. So gamist. And we all came together, and we had, it's the game you have, not the game you can get. It's the game that you've got, not the game that you can necessarily select from, and the people. And so we all got along kind of out of force. But I think the military had also trained us to all kind of get along in a certain manner. And so it all ended up pretty well. There were a couple times where people were a little bit mad at each other, and sore feelings and stuff, but we would all come back the next week and it would all be forgotten. So
This is this is interesting, because something I think about in terms of military gaming that I'm just thinking about now at this moment is that I think for a lot of people, they've only played with the same people, right? Like they lived in one place, they stayed in that place, they played with the same people most of their lives.
Right.
They have a group that, and that group is set. But I would have many different groups, right? People would come in, people would leave. I would then leave to go to a different duty station. And so I was exposed to really different kinds of players doing different things. And there was a real, the group that I was at, the last group I was at, that I played the longest with when I was in Germany, I loved them. They were like 4 game masters. And,
nice.
Right. And so we just would rotate, and this is the first time this had ever happened. Before, it was almost always like, well, you're the game master, you're going to do it forever until you burn out and die. But with this one, we're like, okay, we'll each run for like 12 or 13, 14 sessions, and then we'll rotate, and we'll come back to you. And since we were rotating GMs, each GM would do a different kind of a game. And I played villains and vigilantes, Stormbringer. You name it. We played whatever random weird thing. And there was a real sense of exploration and, well, let's try something out. Like, I don't know what this is like. Let's try it out. And there was, it was very, it's funny because people don't think of the military that way, right? They don't think of the military as a place that's sort of open, but there's so many different people that are interacting with each other.
I think that goes with like Hollywood and media in particular, kind of glorifying or focusing on infantry. And so they think everything is like the infantry experience, and it's not. From what there's some people that like, especially during peacetime, it's more like a college atmosphere. So you've got a lot of people living together, kind of under the same roof. They come from all over the place. You spend some time together during a duty type of action, and then in the evening you're off and you're around each other. And if you don't really want to get out and go somewhere, then you're just kind of stuck with the people around you, or you spend your time alone. It's kind of one of those. It's one way or another. And so the socializing, you try to find groups in which your interests are similar, whatever those be, and then they might not be from your unit, they might be from another unit, they might be from 2 barracks over, and you have to walk a little bit to go over and play games with them. We had probably 3 different wargaming groups, and some of the people that were in the wargaming groups bled over to the people that were playing RPGs, and some of them didn't, and that was fine. You had a guy that was probably the last person stereotypically you would think to play RPGs, but he was really into hunting and 4-wheel drive vehicles, and he would sit down there and be gung-ho, and you would look at him and go, and I mean, like, massive dude too. And he'd sit down and, he was playing a wizard of all things. So it was one of those type of deals. But I think the military really opens your mindset on how different people can be in a way that maybe other places, like you said, I've never really had before that, I had never really had a solid group where you played every night.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that was my first experience. Various different people. Some people might have to go on leave or
Yeah.
go on a different duty station and they just are gone for good, or
Yeah.
they, go on some sort of temporary duty that they go for like a month, and we have to deal with whatever happens with them being gone, and they come back. So to me, players being gone doesn't always matter, and I can play whenever. Other people, I think it kind of gets it kind of upsets them
Yeah.
that the group doesn't stay together. And I've seen that a lot with certain people. They just don't want to play if everybody's not there.
Yeah, I was thinking something. You've really got me thinking about what the military experience does, right, for your gaming. I think about this a lot now. Like my mind's going, and I was thinking about the military. One, unless you're an officer, right, and older, there are a lot of young people who don't have money.
Oh yeah,
you don't get paid really well in the military.
You blow through it all because you've bought a bunch of RPG books and now you're eating at the chow hall and just hanging out at the barracks because you don't have any money.
Right, but even
I wouldn't know anything about that.
Nope. But I think my first paycheck was $700. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But here's the thing. My GURPS book, that was one book. I owned it. I didn't have to buy anything else, right? So I was thinking about the ways in which, for me, one of the great things about RPGs is that once you get those core books, you can just not buy any more things, and you could still have a great time for years. So here's this hobby you can do that is not that expensive. I mean, you can spend more money on it if you want to, but you can, on the base level, you can do without a lot of money. And what's interesting about the military is that it's like college, except you don't have homework. So
yeah, you're free. Yeah. Right.
We had time.
Right. Every now and then you might have to go on duty one night, and then you all gussied up in uniform. You get to watch other people have fun, and you don't. And that's really what happens.
That's right.
And you're sitting there just
and you're like,
yeah,
and nothing happens, but there you are.
Superman, this is
Carlin was saying that in his late teens he had a group, but that group was a bunch of older guys, in their 30s, so old, who are mostly ex-Marines, and it was a very varied experience, lots of different genres and settings, though mostly not exclusively GURPS. And I wonder about, actually, what does it mean to... So going back to the military for one moment, one of the things that was so valuable to me was that, I grew up in San Francisco and Oakland, and I joined the Army, and I'd never left the state. I had never been out of my home state. Yeah. Until I joined the Army. That was the first time I was on an airplane when I flew off to basic training.
That's my first time on an airplane too, yeah.
Yeah, right. I'd never been out of state, I'd never been on an airplane. I go to South Carolina in August.
Oh, thank you.
No.
What the hell is this?
What is this? What is humidity? I don't understand. But I met people that I met a woman from rural Ohio who had never seen or had heard of a burrito or an egg roll before. She didn't know what they were. And I was like, don't worry about it. Just eat it. It's fine. I'd met people with such really different experiences, and I never would have met them had I not been in the military. So all of a sudden I was really my eyes were opened up to a real varied experience, even just outside of gaming. And then I think having that experience of being around people from such different walks of life, classes and races and regions and experiences, then just made my gaming really different. Because it wasn't just me playing with my high school friends, it was these really different people.
Well, it made your life different. So obviously it made your gaming different. It changes your perspectives on a lot of different things. I had never really met anyone from Mexico before, or spoke Spanish fluently, and so, I'd never met anyone that had really, and so meeting a guy from Mexico that sent the majority of his paycheck back to his family to help, feed them, and he was working on his citizenship through the military because you could do that. Was a really kind of eye-opening thing. I didn't realize people did that. I didn't realize you could even really do that. And he was a really awesome fellow that I still talk to occasionally. But yeah, and he told me about Mexican polka music and everything like that. Yeah. So it was cool. But that's a life thing too. So I think that goes along with a life experience. So you're because gaming is whatever you take your life experiences and you put them into your gaming,
Yeah.
regardless of what it is. So if I've been to the mountains a lot, then I know how to describe mountains really well. There's jagged rocks that jut out. There's leaves. The forest ends at a certain point. That sort of thing. If I've not, then I might not be as eloquent with that, or I might talk about something else that I do know. Maybe I'm from the desert, or I'm from something else. So being traveled and being exposed to different cultures affects your gaming in a way, but also affects your social life and everything else in a point that I think really benefits some. Some people are resistant to change to the point where it doesn't really, that it wasn't a good fit for them.
Will you do me a favor?
Like, yes.
Will you go into your Zoom settings under audio and see if it's automatically adjusting microphone settings?
That might be what it is.
It might be, because your volume.
That's probably what it is.
Let me just see if you've got anything checked.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. Is this better now?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Turn me down now. That's exactly what it was.
Perfect.
Okay. Yes, the video software. Thank you, Colonel. Yes.
Thank you, chat.
Yeah, I had updated it, and I think it reverted it back to like default settings. So that's probably what happened. I remember Zoom being funky with audio.
Yeah. Oh, Cyclona says, I love gaming the internet age. I have friends all over the world that I regularly play with. Amazing. It's the best.
Yeah. And that's the sort of experience that I'm talking about too, is that now you can talk to somebody that's, in the middle of nowhere, England, or, from southern France, or, or wherever in the world that they're from, and have those connections where they might come at something in a manner in which you've never thought of even applying that to. So
it's funny because like you, I did not have money, so I never went to a gaming convention. Like, I never went to Gen Con, anything like that. Like, that would be...
I still got to Gen Con. I need to do...
You should go.
Like, I know.
Now we're grown-ups. We can go.
But, I know. But now grown-ups have responsibility.
I know, it's true. But, like, little me could never go. And so I'd never had that experience. So it was really, for me, it was the military that gave me that kind of experience that some other people might have gotten by going to a convention where they could, meet other gamers that way. So for me, it was mostly just, it was, the Army was a big deal, actually.
It was a big deal, yeah. The military life is such a changing experience that I don't think it's easy for us to explain it in a manner in which the what's the word I'm looking for? The kind of omniscient almost change that happens within you, not just like boot camp type stuff, but the exposure to different things that a lot of people just don't see.
Do you know what's interesting? I've published 2 RPG articles in Pyramid magazine. So
Colonel's got it right. It's a formative experience. That's exactly.
It really is. And so I've published 2 professional RPG articles, and the first one I published was how to run military RPG games, and it was not a particularly long article. It was just an article, right, in the magazine.
Now, was it an article about running games in a military setting, or was it a game about you're in the military and you're playing RPGs?
Okay. It was about running a game in a military setting, and the reason why I wrote it was, and I think it was something called like more than just the uniform, but it was like because what I noticed was that many people who were civilians, they would always say things like, "Oh, I would never want to play a game where everybody's in the military because you can't do anything and it won't be fun," right? Like civilians' idea of what the military is like is. Like, they're like, but I want to play Dungeons and Dragons where I can do whatever I want to do. But if we were setting a game in the military, like, I'd have to follow orders. I couldn't do anything. It'd be so terrible. And so like, the whole thing was like, you do have off time. Like, you're not always working. There are a lot of things you could do if you're setting a military campaign.
You're not a robot.
You're not a robot.
Yeah.
And like, there are so many things. And so it was like about the kinds of things you could imagine how to have a game where the PCs are soldiers that has more stuff going on than just, I don't know, you're in a combat action, but things like somebody's drunk, like your friend is drunk downtown and causing trouble. Can you get them before the MPs get them and bring them on base so they don't get in trouble? Like all the different kinds of things that you could do that are fun and goofy and just trying to make people realize that military people are not robots. And that was the very first article that I ever wrote, was trying to explain to civilians how you can make a game with military PCs where they get to be human beings.
Right, where it's not all combat, guns, following orders. Yeah. I think that's the thing that is lost with the media, is that the military is not just all shoot, follow orders, salute, shoot some more type thing. There's a lot more that happens, that it's just humanity existing in a military environment, not just rank and file type of scheme.
And I think also and this is, I think, the biggest, misperception, which goes into the fact that we were gaming a lot in the military. One of the biggest misperceptions I think that civilians have is they think that the military is boot camp or basic training.
Yeah.
They think that's what the whole experience is like, and that is 8 to 12 weeks.
They think you're waking up with a footlocker at the end of a bunk bed every single day.
No.
I had my own room. We had Navy barracks that were brand new when we moved in onto Miramar, and I shared the bathroom with one person, and I had my own both our rooms connected to the bathroom. And
those were nice.
Yes, they were very
nice. Yeah. I know those. I know those style barracks.
Yeah, they were Navy barracks. And I had my own little room. I had a desk and some shelves and a closet that you had to kind of rig up differently during inspections, and all that. And it was very much like a dorm type of thing. Yeah. You could get cable television in your room, even, so it wasn't some,
Sal knows those barracks were nice.
They were brand new. So when I reported for duty, it was at El Toro, Marine Corps Air Station El Toro in Irvine, California, Orange County. And that was during the Clinton years, and this would be early 98. Reported for duty there. And it was already slated for closure. And its sister station, Tustin, which was just across the highway, were scheduled to move into Miramar, which is, if you watch Top Gun, that's where Top Gun was filmed, was at Miramar. The Navy was moving Top Gun out to El Centro, out in the desert, and then all the Marines were going to take over Miramar. So then I got sent down there early, and we got really fancy barracks and felt really stylish, because before that, I was in a room with 3 other people, and so 6 of us shared a bathroom, and 3 of us shared a room. And I was in a bunk bed at that point, but there was a bunk bed and a single bunk, and the single bunk got the highest ranking one in the room, got the single bunk. That's how that went. But then we all got our own rooms, and it was wonderful.
Krellin, I think you are the closest thing to an Air Force person that we have here. I think. Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah.
No, I mean, and I don't know, I think about this a lot, because I am excited about running military campaigns, right? That's a thing that I think is very interesting, because there are a lot of really cool stories that you can tell in a military. And it's funny, because I was thinking about people don't yell at you that much once you get out of basic training. They usually talk to you like a human being.
Unless you're in trouble, I mean,
unless you're in trouble.
When you're in trouble, you know you're in trouble. Yeah. It's like mom, at home. When she raises her voice, you know you're in trouble, and it's the same in the military that way. But as far as getting yelled at, no.
People ask you questions. They're like, "What do you think?" Like, people ask you what you think. Like, it's like you're not a robot. And and that's one of the reasons why I was really excited to do Night Witches, because there was a lot of base stuff, and I wanted to sort of get some of those things. And I just would like to run something. Maybe what is it? Krellin who was talking about it? Band of Blades. Band of Blades, probably.
Band of Blades is what I was talking about. Band of Blades,
Band of Blades. I think that's the one.
Yeah.
Because I think you could do something really cool.
I think you could too. The only thing with that one is that it doesn't have a lot of downtime as far as off duty, because it is during a military exercise type thing where you're going from point A to point B. Now you could have moments, campfire moment type things. I think with that, one thing I was thinking while you were talking about that, I was applying the mentality of you meet at an inn to the military. And so in my brain, I'm thinking, it's almost perfect, because you've got a kind of forced thing where you've got all these different people coming together in a certain point that you may not have otherwise. It's when you're writing backstories for characters, you might say, well, the yada, yada, yada happened, this person passed. Okay, now how do I get to where everyone's at? And with the military stories, there's your answer. It's just you're in the same barracks, and that's, you might have different MOSs, or something. One guy might work on airplanes, and one guy might work down the flight line, and then there's the yokel from Kentucky that works on forklifts and cranes, So, but that might be what you have, and it's almost a perfect match. And it's funny that nobody has really exploited that yet. And I'm wondering, maybe I might write that idea down.
Write it down. Write it down.
Yeah, I might write it down.
As Sal says, you meet an inn turns into you all end up drawing a billet for such and such duty station.
Yeah, true.
And it's actually, this is interesting, and I think that one of the problems is, and so many people start talking about RPGs like films, and I think that films are not a good model for RPGs at all, because RPGs tend to be.
I mean, you can have a film type RPG, and there's you can have action type, the action sets that are kind of those.
I think TV's better than film.
TV is better because it's got a series, it's got episodes, and you're right in that.
It can be an action TV show, right?
Yes, right. Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that kind of cheesy, unrealistic action.
Oh, totally.
Those are fun, and if that's your jam, go for it, right? But I think that if you're trying for an authentic experience, episodic is always better than a one-shot movie.
Yeah, and I like Krellin says, RPGs are closer to TV shows. I think that thinking about TV shows is a little bit easier, or maybe books, because books are longer. But here's the thing I was thinking about: there are not a lot of military TV shows, right? If you think about,
there's been a couple, but like JAG.
Yeah.
There was one that I'm actually on. There's a TV show that I'm on, and I'm in the background. And I can't. I've looked and looked. There's an episode that I'm in, and I'm driving my forklift in the background because it was Pensacola Wings of Gold that they shot in Miramar because it was closer to Hollywood than Pensacola, and they needed Navy pilot stuff, and then they needed that there. But there have been very few like that. But they're all very unrealistic. The people always have really long hair.
Oh my God!
No.
It kills me. The haircuts.
Yeah.
And, sorry.
I'm like that would work in the Navy maybe, but Marine Corps haircut, that is straight out. No, thank you. No,
maybe the Air Force, but it wouldn't work in the Army.
Right.
It always, two things bug me about military movies, and the two things are: one, the haircuts are wrong, not going to happen, and two, the actors are always too old. Like if you're 50, you're long since retired.
Well, in that Pensacola Wings of Gold, they had like a 65-year-old man be the wing commander of a squadron of, and I'm like, no. No. And they always, I think the thing is that in the military, you have a lot of responsibility laid upon you, so that age kind of comes. It seems like age comes with it, but it really doesn't. Like a sergeant will be like 20, 21, and people don't realize that. They think, oh, a sergeant's old 30, grumpy bastard. No, if you're 30, you're like on your way out. You're probably like, I'm going to retire soon.
Right, like you can retire at 38. You know what I mean?
Right,
like,
exactly. Yeah. Why would? Yeah. No, I am completely yes.
So those two are my two pet peeves. I was like, no, you're all too old. And what's up with your hair? I cannot have it.
Or they have like the military bearing slightly off in a manner that is just like you're going.
Or they can't salute. Like that's the other one that makes me crazy. I was like, what are you doing? Carolyn's like, MASH did that. Raider was super old 20-year-old. And that was good because that's like what you want. But one of the things I was thinking about though about this is that I think so you had MASH, right? MASH is one. JAG, although JAG is a little bit tricky sometimes, right? Because
JAG is a lawyer show with a military like overlay is really all it is. So it's NCIS is kind of the same way. It's a detective show with like a military overlay on it.
And I think a lot of them aren't even military in NCIS.
There's a lot of civilian. Yeah. I think there's only a couple that are even. I think there are those civilian rate type person stuff. So there's not. Let's see. Was it? What was the beach? It was something beach.
China Beach. That would be a good model actually for an RPG show if you want to do something set, because it was that was a great show. And it was, so you have a one base. It was China Beach was the hospital, right, in Vietnam. So you had all of the medical people, but it was not only was the hospital, it was also the R&R space. Right. So you had people coming in from R&R, you had the medical people. So it was like there was like an undertaker, like, so you could, I mean, I think in terms of an RPG setting, that would work so well because you could get a wide variety of people. You had some infantry,
you have pilots coming in and out. You have, and it would work because you would have a very diverse set of not only ranks, but of people and occupations and experiences within the military itself, because there are vastly different experiences within the military as well. A person that is in the infantry will have a very different experience than someone who is a aircraft maintenance person, something like that. So,
and I think you could have a long-term campaign in that setting, pretty easily done. That would still be interesting. Would have interesting adventures.
I think you could too, because you would. If you wanted it to have combat, you would kind of need a wartime environment for that to happen. If you didn't want combat, which is a perfectly viable role-playing game, I think too, I think that would probably not be as desirable maybe for certain types of people. I think it would take a special group kind of to want to do that rather than a wartime stuff. Because I mean, combat is somewhat intrinsic to RPGs, so there's definitely a section of the populace that wants that in their games. So
Krillin was asking about Supergirl, and I watched the first season of Supergirl, but then basically my TV access became not like I have a TV, but I currently also no longer have TV access again because the cable on my campus is not really working. So I've not got to the point where they put a colonel in charge of civilians and that colonel starts treating everyone like soldiers. That's weird.
That is very strange.
Especially since colonels, let's be really fair, officers, I'm going to talk smack about officers. It's just a thing we do. Like, they're like barely soldiers. Like, they're mostly just managers.
I count among the officers that I know, there are three that were really standout personnel for me. One was the last lieutenant I had, and she was really gung-ho and wanted to understand where we were coming from and was very hands-on with everything. She rode in the equipment. She was not in the office locked away, and she wanted to know exactly what was going on with her platoon. She was young and very gung-ho and just out of college, second lieutenant, and wanted to do that. And she was in a billet that was vastly populated with males. So I can understand her wanting to be that gung-ho about it. There was another officer that I served with in Alaska, and he had been a Lance Corporal and then had become an officer. So he had a completely different experience than even other officers. They call it Mustang. I don't know if they call it that in the Army or not. But and so he was he understood where I was at more than any other officer, probably at that point in time. Had been. There was another colonel that was in the Army that I interacted with, and he was on his way out, and you could tell, and he didn't have to give a damn about anything, and he would tell it exactly as it is, because he really, there was nothing unless he really did something bad, there wasn't anything anybody could do to him, and he was a hoot. But those three are probably, the rest of them, they were very exactly, I'm sure, what you were thinking in the officers. It's
we had choice terms for them. By the way, Krellin, that makes no sense. You would not have civilian salute officers. That makes no sense. That's I mean, that just wouldn't happen. That makes no sense. I just reject that. Just reject it. It's no good. And it's what I think is so funny is that a lot of these RPGs are quasi-military-esque, right? Like, you think about your typical D&D group, they're basically mercenaries, right? So and the fighters especially, they kind of aim it in that direction. Oh, you were a knight. Oh, you were a foot soldier. Oh, you were this, that, or the other. And then they don't often follow up on that lifestyle, or they don't give a lot of guidance to that, which would probably be another idea I probably need to write down. And that's why that's like my very first article was about that. It was about how to actually try to realize that military people are not robots, and that actually you can have fun, right? You can have fun. Because, I mean, people get drunk. like all the things you can do as a civilian. If you can imagine doing a civilian game, you can imagine doing a military game, because people are going to do those things.
And anything you can think of that you were dumb and 20 and did was done or more in the military during service, during off hours. If you can think of something that's been dumb, then it's been done.
Here's a plot hook that I put in the article that also happened for real. A fellow military intelligence, right? I believe he was a HOG, which is a Morse code intercept operator. And Morse code intercept operators, they are all a little
wild.
They've got, I think it does something to you to be
spirited.
Really...
Yeah.
It just
too many ticks going on, and it's I gotcha.
Like I remember sitting in a room during like a bunch of us were all sitting around, and it was raining, and the hog just started like kind of mildly freaking out, like internally, and we're like, what's going on? And we're like, he was interpreting the rain hitting the window as Morse code, but it was just all white noise and didn't make any sense. It was like just weird letters, and it was freaking him out. And I was like, oh, okay. Anyway, one of these Morse code operators went missing, and his friends had to try to find him before the unit realized that he was missing, and he had just kind of. Yeah, and because we all have security clearances, right? So like none of that,
right?
Because if there's a problem, then you get your security clearance stripped, then you lose your job. It's it's all bad. And he just kind of lost it. He kind of decided that like aliens were coming, and like he just gone to that space. They found him.
Yeah.
But I was like, well, what if actually aliens are coming? Like you could actually do a kind of a cool, right?
Yeah, I mean the kind of what is it? What is the word I'm looking for? The aliens, the 50s aliens, and the flying saucers, and was it Area 51? All that sort of stuff you could integrate. So conspiracy theories.
Theories. You could be so good. Sal is, and this is actually interesting. Sal points out. Sal says the only real problem. Sal's like he really would lose the security clearance. People were trying to protect him because they're like, you're going through a bad moment. You could do a very X-Files thing. So Sal says, and this is interesting, a lot of we run into a lot with military settings and RPGs is that eventually one PC is going to have rank over the other PCs, and for some reason civilians tend to think that means they have to follow whatever the higher ranked individual said.
That's not how that works.
No. And it's also, and I think this is really interesting because this gets to another sort of issue about RPGs, and that's about party leaders and hierarchy.
It can get gross.
But also can sometimes, if you go back to, first edition D&D, they always recommended that there was a party leader who would herd cats a little bit and say, hey, here's our marching order. And it was interesting because the idea that there would be a party leader, not a dictator, but somebody who would just sort of try to make sure that
everything is flowing and the game is progressing.
Right. And so there was that's built into the beginning that there'd be somebody who the GM could just say, okay, all right, what are you doing?
Right.
And it's funny, right? And I it's a thing I've thought about a lot, about a kind of a resistance to organization amongst the party in ways that like if you're playing I don't know if you watched Leviathan, but they're on a ship, there's a captain, because there should be a captain.
There's a leader. Yeah, there has to be. Yeah.
Oh.
It's too big of a thing in order to not, you can't just chaotically make it work. There has to be a leadership authority at some point. It's an interesting thing because the rank and thing with the military is just so absurd in media because of I've seen it so many times where someone gains a rank. You were all buddies, and then all of a sudden someone's an MCO, and now, and there is certain personalities that do that. And so now I'm the corporal. I don't hang around with you E3s anymore, and in a way there has to be, if there's going to be a combat involved, but a lot of times I didn't see any combat. I got out before 9/11. I was in from 97 to 3 months before 9/11 didn't see any combat. I was going to get sent over to the Gulf at one point, but then they stripped down the numbers on that. So there's no there's jobs that you do during the day that have a rank to them, but just because someone's an E4 and you're an E3 doesn't mean that they can just snap at their fingers and you're doing whatever.
Yeah. Because you're in a job.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
right. They're not your direct manager. If you were to apply it to like an office space, there's different managers, but they're not necessarily a manager that's over you. It is got any say of what you do. Just like an E4 that's, and if you're an E3 and there's an E4, they don't have any say on what you do. They're doing their thing and you do yours, and hopefully everything gets done by the end of the day, or you're in trouble.
There's a phrase that about this that I always used to laugh because it's true, but also stupid. Like this phrase is a complicated phrase. It does a lot of work, and it was always said only by military police. And that phrase was, "Do not confuse your rank with my authority." Right. Because if you're an MP and you're a private, and there's like a drunk lieutenant, doesn't matter that they outrank you by a whole lot.
Nope.
Right. And what's so funny about it was like, one, it's true because there are people who are high ranking that need to learn, right? But on the other hand, it's like, hey, private, like maybe you want to like private military police, maybe you want to relax a little bit because.
And it's like guard duty too, right? Yeah. So if you're on guard duty, there is a sergeant of the guard, and then there's a captain of the guard, and those two are in charge of you. Anyone else, it doesn't matter if the commandant of the Marine Corps comes by. No, sir, you are not allowed in this bunker. It is full of dangerous things. There was a person in my unit that pointed a gun at a lieutenant because he was going to come in, and it was a nuclear authorized area, and he was not going to take any chances with, because had he let him in, he's in trouble. So
that's right.
Like, and those sort of things happen. And that's the side of the military that kind of gets a little bit more gung-ho about things. But that's he was on duty for like 2 weeks and had that happen. And then he was off duty and just doing normal things the rest of the time.
So now here's the thing I also want to know. This is exciting to me. You left the Marine Corps.
Yes.
And you
yes.
Your experience in the Marine Corps was just like Full Metal Jacket, 100%.
Oh, yeah.
Because
and the funny thing is I watched that movie probably 300 times before I got in the Marine Corps. And I thought, oh, this will prepare. No, it didn't prepare me for anything.
And Crona's right. Like, lieutenants are so funny. They can either be really great or terrible, those lieutenants.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, it's just people can be great. Or you could have an awesome sergeant, or you can have a really crummy guy, and he's just a crummy guy. It doesn't matter what their rank is. There could still be crummy.
The one thing that thing that is interesting to me about Full Metal Jacket, after having been in the military, is that I now see that whole basic training sequence, that boot camp sequence, very differently. A lot of civilians think Gunny Sergeant Lee Ermey.
Arlie Ermey, yes. I got to meet him.
Did you really?
Yes. He would come to base when the Miramar would have air shows. We would have an air show every year, and he would show up and sign autographs and all that.
Wow.
So I got to meet him a couple different times, and he was really neat. He is now passed, but he was a pretty interesting fellow. But yeah, he played Gunnery Sergeant Hartman in Full Metal Jacket.
Yep.
I got all that memorized.
But I remember watching it after being in, and I remember having this thing where like, I'd be with these civilians and they'd say, "Oh my God, he's so horrible. He's the worst person ever. Isn't that awful?" And I was like, actually, I don't think you understand what's happening. He wants to make sure they don't die in war. Like he's not actually
them for the hardships. Yes.
Like it's the 70s and these are draftees. So it's a little different style, but he's not a sadist, right? He's not out to get them. And they didn't get that there was a purpose to what he was doing, and it wasn't
right. Yeah, they're hard on you to make you not to help you to form you into the thing so that you don't die.
Yeah,
that's all it really is. So,
and so it was just that that was interesting. So you leave the Marine Corps,
I left.
And then you come back home.
No, so when I was in the Marine Corps, I had made a promise to myself because I had seen I came from a divorced home, right?
Yeah.
And I had seen other people that were my age getting in, get into the fleet, or even before when we were in MOS school, get married.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
You're 18.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't realize this. So if you are single, you stay at the barracks.
Yep.
Until you're maybe an E5, and then you might have
maybe.
I was
an E5 in the barracks.
Right. There's a lot of E5s still in the barracks. E6, you're definitely out, but E5, you could still be in the barracks. Ours, by the time we hit E5, they wanted you out of the barracks, so they had too many non-comps for the barracks to full. But the only way that you can not live in the barracks and not have field day and not have inspections and not have wall locker inspections on Friday morning when you really don't want to wake up and do all that crap is to get married and get out. And there's so many bonuses to getting married.
Mm-hmm.
You get to go home to your wife.
Mm-hmm.
You get to live off base or maybe on base and base housing.
Mm-hmm.
You get extra money because you're married and you have to provide for this person. And wait, if you have kids, you get even more money because you have to provide for them. And so there would be people that would just do this. And I'm just like, oh, that's a bad choice.
They would get married to people that they have known for a month. Like,
yes. Oh yeah.
Oh.
Or even getting married to people that they had known in high school and was like their high school sweethearts. And then that military life was not something that they could handle. And you would see a lot of divorce rate. The military has the highest divorce rate in any occupation. Just that's it, and so I made a promise to myself early on, after seeing all these trials and tribulations of these other of my peers, to just I'll get out, and that's when I'll get married and stuff. So I met this lovely woman in 2000. I had bought a brand new truck, a Ford Bronco. I had spent all my money and I was broke, but we were going to go out to a movie. And we went out, and I picked that truck up, and I picked her up, and she's in the other room right now. So, and she's awesome. But she was in school to become a jeweler and a gemologist. And she had moved from Virginia and was living out there, and her father was paying for all this money for this thing. She had wanted to become a geologist, and then decided she did not like the field work that goes along with geology. And it's like, no, camping is not my style. And so then she heard about this gemology school called GIA in Carlsbad, California, which is actually right off base of Pendleton. And I was from Miramar, so I kind of swooped in there underneath all those Pendleton Marines and got her. We met online, which was very early online dating, like super. It was called Match.com, not or Matchmaker.com. It was before Match come out, and it was like a really like rudimentary dial-up internet on my friends. And I went on 3 dates before her. None of them were any good, and then went out with her, and that just stuck. And so when she moved up to Seattle, I said, "What if I come up to Seattle too?" And I got out of the Marine Corps and drove from San Diego to Seattle. And we lived together up there, and then we got married. Yeah, CSL. Got married, had kids, moved back here because of the kids to Kentucky, because that's where I'm from, and it was closer to her family and stuff too.
And yours too, right?
Yeah. And so, kids could live with grandparents and that sort of thing. And we're still here. Having
people who can help with childcare is super helpful because that's expensive.
Oh, that's very beneficial. And so I had worked security mostly in Seattle, and then I got a job at a carpet warehouse dealer type installer thing, and I worked in the warehouse loading up trucks and cutting carpet and all that. And then we moved back here, had kid number 2, or actually moved back here, moved to Tennessee for a little bit, moved back here, and then had kid number 2 in the meantime. I started becoming stay-at-home dad because it was much easier to do that than me working basically to pay for the child that I was doing otherwise. And that became just a thing. And now I homeschool my son, and then my daughter is in high school. He turns 13 next month, which is, and then I'll have 2 teenagers.
Oh no!
And her junior year starts this next year.
Wow!
She'll be out. So
she's old.
Yeah. I'm old. No, I'm not old. We had kids very young, and which is a good thing too, because now we won't be. I have peers of mine, one that I knew from Marine Corps who is just now having kids, and I'm like, ooh, when they're 20, you'll be 60. No, no, thanks. That's okay. I'm fine with how I am right now. So,
your kids game now, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, my daughter actually, I bought the D&D Essentials kit the other day, and she's going to run a game for her friends. And then we started with 5th edition. My youngest was old enough to kind of handle that, so we started with that. I figured that would be easy to get him into. I knew, the rudimentary things about D&D. And then so that's been great. What we've tried different games, none of them really stick. My wife grew up with AD&D and kind of is in that mentality we were talking about earlier, where it's I know this, so I keep doing this, and so she knows that the best and kind of sticks to those type of things. So we work around that.
How awesome is that? So tell me about how your kids are responding, because I'm gonna just say a thing and then you go.
Go.
People say things, and the people who say things are old people. They're our age, although we're not old. And they say this thing all the time. They're like, the problem with getting young people into RPGs is that RPGs are too complicated, and young people, they can't handle complicated things. And so, we've got to make like games that are super, super simple for young people. And I was like, I think what you mean is you don't want complicated games because your life is complicated. Young people can handle complicated games.
Yeah, well, I figured, I was around 12 when I was starting to figure out Hero Quest and stuff. So I figured that wasn't too different than what I was seeing with 5th edition. Now, we started a little bit simple. Oh, okay.
And I have no privacy. Whoa, I always feel that somebody's watching me. Tell me, is it just a dream? Imp in my head, thank you for the follow. Hey, Imp, thank you. We are so close. By the way, we are really close.
So I'm at 9 now, or is it lower than
that? We're either at 492 or 493, so we 7 or 8.
Oh, wow.
So excited. So excited. So go on. We're talking about sort of complicatedness.
So, I figured, I was 12 or so when Hero Quest was around, and I could handle that math, and I could handle the dice, I could handle all that. I figured, if I don't kind of push my kids, then they'll always have, why go easy when you can challenge them, right? Yeah. And has always been my mentality with any learning. Go a little bit further than you would normally, because why, if you can't advance if you don't advance, right? Yeah. And so we started with 5th edition. We did start a little bit simpler. I didn't throw any complicated rules at them. It was normal dungeon crawling goodness. Yeah. My son he was the youngest. He had a fighter. It's very easy to play a fighter. There's not a whole lot going on, as far as rules and spells and anything like that. But we started off with that, and it's just kind of kept going. He now has 2 characters in our current one, because we're playing Ghost of Saltmarsh like you are on Fridays.
Nice.
2, right, on Greyhawk Channel, right? Yeah. And he has a lizard folk barbarian and who was a co-worker of my daughter's character, who's a gnome. They were both smugglers together.
Oh, cool.
And then he has a ex-pirate cleric who has found a Procan. Nice. Much like your dwarf has.
Nice.
And maybe in a little bit different manner, named Redbeard, which I think is hilarious. He came up with that name. And who now has a parrot, which is awesome. And then, each, there's 3 of them and 1 of me. So at first I did really simple things because it was 3 of them. D&D is really made for 4 or more. And so I would tone it down a little bit. Now each one of them runs 2 characters, and now it's 6. So cool. I can tone it up a little bit and make it a little bit harder. But we've had a pretty good time with that, so it's all fun. Tomorrow we're playing, in fact, because everybody's off work and everything.
Oh, that's right. Krillin says 5e is uncomplicated compared to a lot of things, like Warhammer.
Warhammer, yeah. I really attempted to get my wife to play Warhammer, and we did with some neighbors in Seattle who were also gamers. And that was really fun. They were excellent people, and we were really lucky to have somebody that just lived downstairs that we could game with.
Yeah.
And he ran the game, and I actually got to play for once because I had never played the game that I own. It's just, you bring the book, you have to DM type of thing. You know all the rules. And he was DMing, and it was pretty rad. But she's a D20 through and through, so that's how that goes.
It's interesting, right? How what your formative gaming is, how that impacts you, And
it does a lot, and it's. We've discussed this at length too, and it skews your views in a manner in which you don't realize until you've been approached by a different game. Really,
it's Mr. Game and Frog was like, I feel like the simplicity of 5e leaves a lot of room for creative RP. I also think that they have been more deliberate about including RP hooks in character creation in a way that was not the case back in the day. Like, if you want to do a lot of RP in first edition, you just had to do it on your own.
You had to figure it out.
You had to figure out. Whereas I was looking at fifth, I was making my character for fifth, and I was like, oh, they've got flaws, they've got drives,
the whole background system is D&D is really good about absorbing elements of the trends that are happening around it and trying to put it in a D&D perspective.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's great. Sometimes it's a little bit like, okay, you're reaching, you know.
Yeah.
But in that, I really enjoyed it because it gave it sets your brain to thinking about it. Even if you never write down any of those flaws and everything, you think, oh, well, what is my character's flaw? What is my character's drive? I don't have to use this crummy table that they pre-made. I could just make up whatever. And so that's the personality traits. And yes, Krellin, it does use the D100 roll under. It's basic fantasy role playing, I think, is what the original request and all that.
I didn't know that Warhammer was originally BRP.
Yes, the only in third edition did it go, and it went to, was it Fantasy Flight or whatever, and they used those special dice. But first and second edition, and now fourth edition, are all D100 roll under systems, and it's pretty rad. It's pretty rad.
And you know, it's so funny because we were having this discussion also sort of tangentially with your wife about roll under versus roll over.
Yes.
And a lot of people think, oh, well, rolling high is great because bigger numbers.
It's easy to parse in your brain, really, and I understand where it comes from. I mean,
although for me, having a skill number makes a lot of sense as well, right? Like my skill is 75, so I want to roll under my skill. Like, I think the difference is that with D&D, your roll is disconnected from a skill. Like, you roll and then you add bonuses on top.
Trying to get an additive. And I think and that's why I look at it's tough because, like, Warhammer, I'm like, oh yeah, like I'm thinking about Warhammer now. You know, you're always building up. You're always building up. The numbers on your sheet always go up, and they do with the D20 systems too. You know, your charisma goes up. You're better. You take that base number, and then you get this other number that you add to the dice, and it's like, why not just use that number? You know, why have two different numbers where one means another number? Than not just have a number and you roll under it and you're fine. You're right.
It's funny. Krellin is like, yeah, roll under is rad when you have dice that no numbers under 50 exist, which I don't. You know, this is so about D100. The one thing I haven't really dug into 7th edition Call of Cthulhu yet. I've like skimmed it, you know, like you're like, get the book, skim it.
Right.
And they have added advantage and disadvantage, so that if you have advantage, then you roll the 2 10s, and then you pick the most advantageous one for you, the better one. And I think that's good. I think that with a D100, because it actually is kind of a flat probability curve, some way to manipulate those dice, I think, is good if you're doing D100s.
The newest edition, this 4th edition that there goes some of my dice. This 4th edition book, it takes the good parts of, it's kind of like how 5th edition took the good parts of the thing before. So this, they call it a throwback, but there's a lot of differences. So if you start winning, you keep winning. It's an additive system. So it's easier if you've already been wailing on, you know, your enemy and you're winning, you tend to keep winning it. As a downhill type of momentum thing until, like, maybe they get a lucky roll and get back, and then all of a sudden you're on the retreat. So it's not as swingy as 1st edition is, and I'll freely admit that it's a very, you know, especially early on, it's a very deadly game. You don't have a lot of wounds that you can take. You don't have a lot of armor possibly, you know, and you're trying to roll under maybe a 30, which is not the easiest thing to do.
I know that. So I do have Unknown Armies, the newest edition, which is, I don't know, it's over there. It's over there. But I've not read the newest edition. I've read the first 2, and I imagine they're doing something similar in the newest edition, but I cannot guarantee that. But they say that basically you have these various values, right? Like your core beliefs and tenets and things that are important to your character. And whenever you're rolling something that is related to those values, you can flip the dice.
Oh, okay.
So like if you roll I need to roll under a 30 and I roll a 72, but it's related to something that's actually part of my core belief, I can make that a 27 instead.
Right.
So it does give you an ability to do some kind of dice manipulation on things that are important to your character. So I feel like if you're going to do a D100, some kind of ability to flip dice, or something to just, because if you're good at something, you should probably be successful at it more than.
And I wonder if that, speaking about kind of your how your brain works with things, because I'm fine with the D100, but I know that you really like 3D6.
I do. Bell curve. I love it.
Yeah, you love the bell curve, and I wonder if that affects that your like or dislike of that, those advantages, those systems that let you kind of have a little bit, not just random dice all over the place.
Yeah.
Like, you probably like the advantage disadvantage system of the D20 and 5th edition, yeah? Or
yes,
no?
I think that helps, right?
Right. And so the random, and we probably both agree that when you have a 3 hit point wizard and that D20 goes wherever it wants to, you don't like that, because it's not like you have no control, you have no power in order to change things. You are completely at the whim of whatever the dice say, which is a very gamist thing too, when we get down to it. But it's also and I think that that affects us. Like, other people I've met are completely fine with that random D20. Oh yeah, well, whatever rolls you roll. Oh, you 2 hit points, well, that's what you have. Tough luck.
And it's funny because the thing is, it's my simulationist side. It's not my narrativist side. It's my simulationist side that's pushing back, because I don't mind people dying in a stupid way.
Right.
It's just that if your character's built to be a master lockpicker,
right,
you're like one of the best in the world, and you cannot succeed in a roll for 3 sessions, there's something wrong for me with how those mechanics are working.
Bad luck happening when I'm supposed to be a skilled person in my profession.
Yeah. If you have a 30%, that's fine. Do you know what I mean? Like, and so just some kind of way to have that die roll, because I love my mechanics, I really do, but I want them to reflect not the fiction, but the reality, right? So if you are really bad at something, I would expect that to be to be not that great at it. And I would expect you to be way better at the things that you're supposed to be good at than the things that you're bad at.
Right. And then there's a lot of systems where I can be like, I have no skill in this, but now I rolled, the highest I can possibly roll at random. And if it's a flat chance probability, then, it's, it kind of irks certain people, and it does me. I'm like, why? No, you're supposed to be the worst at lock picking. Why all of a sudden are you the master locksmith and I'm not?
Right. Like, wait a minute, you did it and I didn't even do it. Like,
right. I have a supreme knowledge of all this, but you just like tapped on it once and it did its thing. So it's, and
Levi was saying that the 4 people he's playing with are pretty gamist, and they love explaining their low skill rolls. And the thing is, I actually enjoy explaining a low skill roll as well. The problem is when it happens too much, when it happens more often than the reality of the situation would, like, once it starts stretching my credibility, then I start feeling a little bit uncomfortable with it. Which does not mean that I want always to succeed. Sometimes if I'm always succeeding, that starts feeling weird too.
And it doubles down if you've tried to kind of aim your character's skill set in that direction and you just are miserable at it. Like, I'm master swordsman, but I've like whiffed every single time for like 2 sessions, and now I'm just sitting there. I'm like, okay, the wizard hits with a dagger and kills the guy, and it's like, this is not fun for me now, because and it's about having fun. So you want those mechanics to reflect what your end goal is to be. You don't have to like hit every time, but a good amount of hitting would be nice.
and Krellin's like, that also bugs them, right? And the thing is, it's fine for that to happen sometimes, because sometimes that happens in real life. But I would hope that the mechanics of your system are structured well enough that it doesn't happen all the time, right? So they're like little things, like, and I'm interested in different kinds of I'm really interested in different kinds of mechanics and how do you do things. And I do want to read a bit more on the cipher system, wherein you have a pool of effort that's based on, like, if you're really good at physical stuff, you have a bigger pool of effort for physical, right? And you can spend that pool to make sure you succeed in a role, but then you don't have that pool anymore. So you as a player get to start making choices about, like, do I want to really use all my resources for this?
Resource management. Yeah.
I do love some resource management.
And see, now I'm thinking too, does this this irk of ours about the probability, is that reflected in a narrativist's argument that story over mechanics makes that non-existent, to the point that I can be the master swordsman in a more narrativist game because the mechanics are not in place to prevent me from doing said thing or said activity, right? So now I can just say I'm the master swordsman, roll some dice, maybe, to kind of, maybe there's a chance that I won't fully succeed at slaying this creature, but maybe I'm still fighting with it or whatever. Is that a reflection of those probabilities in the earlier games that were very, very swingy, coming to fruition, and as people have expanded gaming knowledge, expanded different RPGs and stuff, it makes me wonder, and that's the first thing that went off in my head, and like your earlier kind of affects this. I'm wondering. So
that sounds right to me. I keep thinking about a thing that I'm going to do something with it, but I was collecting a bunch of articles. Robin Laws has one talking about Gumshoe, and John Wick has one talking about the new Seventh Sea, and all of them are saying the same thing. They're like, we just want to get rid of failure because failure is not fun, and like the idea that something important would be down to a die roll, then you fail, and that's terrible. And first I was like, I think failure is fun. I also think it's important. I think it's how you grow and learn. But clearly, they're in a different space than I am. But what's interesting is that they're, I think, reacting to what I would say are bad die mechanics, right? Yes. And also perhaps some bad adventure design, and also thinking about different ideas of what a narrative is.
A lot of there's a combination of things in the past that have happened that might have gotten influenced because there weren't so many games, and now that has become the set standard, and that train of thought has now affected these newer games. I mean, and Krellin's like, the swinginess of a single die system is problematic, and I feel like you've got to find ways to mitigate that if you're going to do that, right? So that, and what I think is interesting is that for me, I was like, well, this doesn't feel realistic to me, right? Like, so that's where I'm pushing back. But they were like, wait, this story is not fun, and so they do things. They do things like, let's get rid of die rolls. Let's have means for players to just like, I think a lot of that narrative stuff is really coming out of, some of those really unsatisfying game which isn't a bad thing. I mean, there's if that's your jam, that's fine. If it's coming from a place where you're not analyzing where your dissatisfaction is coming from, though, are you swinging too far to the other side and not really fixing the problem, creating a whole different problem than the one that you're kind of combating, but not knowing really the details for. I think there's a way between there that can be found, and I think it's going to happen. Like, if someone else doesn't do it, then someone's going to figure it out, and there's going to be a sweet spot that somebody hits, and it's going to be a gangbuster game, I think.
What's interesting to me, though, about this general trend of success, which I'm not particularly excited about, but there is a simultaneous counter trend in the same circle, and that is those Powered by the Apocalypse games, which then sort of runs into the Blade system.
Right.
They're not that forgiving. Like, they trend not towards success. And it's interesting to me that, like, on your 2d6, you only get a full success on what? 9, 10, 11, 12. That's it, right? 10, 11, 12 is your full success. And then 7 through 9 is a partial.
Right.
And then a full 1/2 of that die span is a failure.
Right.
And then the next third is a partial success, not even a full. So in the midst of ideas of, like, let's not fail and whatnot, we have this system that's very popular that does not trend towards unvarnished success. And I think that's very interesting.
Yeah, and I think there's going to be different levels of trying to find that middle ground that appear. I think even Pathfinder 2 that's coming out in Gen Con is trying to find they were very third edition D&D, which was
Mm.
a little bit. It was more forgiving than Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, but compared to what a lot of the other games that are coming out now, it is not very forgiving.
Yeah.
They have started to trend with some different rule sets, like basically. In fifth edition, you have the death saves, so you can get knocked down, back up again, knocked down, back up again. As long as you're making saves or getting healed, you're probably fine. Pathfinder 2, from what I understand, you get knocked down 3 times, you're dead.
Oh, wow.
You're done. And
Interesting.
And so that to me is them pushing back a little bit on what fifth edition is doing in some ways. I've seen some other games that are there was one on Kickstarter and I can't remember the name of it, and it seemed very detailed and very not less than forgiving. Let's put it that way.
Yep.
And I think there, and like you said, there's a counterculture, so there's always going to be a punk.
Yeah.
There's always going to be a punk to whatever the trend is, because you want to be different. Trying to stand out, that sort of thing. Sometimes they full circle, and sometimes the punk becomes the trend, and then you have the other punk now. So we'll see what happens with this. I'm hoping I think it'll happen in the next 5 years. I think in the next 5 years we'll see a game that's not D&D, that maybe doesn't exist now, or maybe it's just coming out that nobody's really caught on to yet, that will really hit hard with some stuff that is maybe against that Forge reality, but that people are gravitating to because it's hitting the right marks between the, especially between the gamist and the narratives type sets. I think we'll have me and you getting simulation. I don't think it's going to happen anytime. Really.
No, I don't think so either. So sad. Krellin points out that a +1 in the apocalypse system is pretty extreme. It's true. A +1 on a 2d6 is a lot.
Yeah.
And so, like, how many bonuses can you generate will really affect the tone of that apocalypse game. If you don't get a lot of bonuses, it's going to be much bleaker than if you do. And Jared's asking, he wonders if this trend comes from all of the MUDs, right, and the forum RPGs of the Turn of the Millennium, where it's a lot of.
I think so too, because I experienced a little bit of that when I moved back to Kentucky. I was on a Neverwinter Nights server and helped to run that, and it was very much a MUD with a graphical element to it. And there were EverQuest 1 was more MUD than graphical MUD than it was MMO in the standard thought of that. There were a lot of people making up their own stories, and the mechanics be damned. I'm talking. What was the other? There's another MMO that really just you walk around. There's several MMOs that have kind of done that trend where it's people make up stories inside of it to make their own entertainment rather than let the game kind of dictate. Yeah, Eve. Yeah. I think Ultima Online, there was a lot of, the game has its mechanics, but we're doing other things that are extra from the mechanics that the mechanics don't cover. Yeah. And so that mindset has to have had some impact on, because the same types of people that were playing those games are playing RPGs. And so, that's definitely.
And I think, for me, I'm personally, I just tend to be excited. Second Life. Second Life.
Second Life is the one. Yes. Thank you, Jared. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And it's like personally, I'm very excited. I tend to learn, even if I'm not going to jump in and play a bunch of things, I really want to, I want to read these new games and see what they're like, maybe even play them for a one-off.
You read games?
When I have time. I don't have as much time as I'd like, because I learn things. Do you know what I mean? Like when I first moved into BRP, right? Call of Cthulhu, RuneQuest, I was like, oh, like
this is my jam. Yeah.
This is amazing. And can you imagine, just imagine going from a pretty hostile, super dungeon crawly, very rules lawyery D&D to Call of Cthulhu. Just
here's the next room, here's the next room, here's the next room, here's the next room. Oh, here's the dragon. Oh, here's, you get the gold. Oh, go back to town. Oh, here's the next room, here's the next dungeon we're gonna play. Here's the next room. To do what do you do now?
Like what?
What do you mean? What do I do now? Is there not a room? Where's the door?
Oh my goodness! And it's fascinating to me, because I've been really thinking about how to. I think also Krellin and Jer probably would also understand. Dungeon crawls can be awful.
Oh yeah.
but there's also an appeal to them. They're not necessarily bad. You have to do, like, there's a group of people for whom it is a meta challenge that they really like. Like, they like the puzzle of trying to figure out how to do. Now, I feel like today those people are more likely to play Descent or certain kind of heavy board games because you can get all of that in there.
Yeah.
But
there's a certain limitation to Descent and HeroQuest and stuff where you can't do everything. There are limits on the mechanics because it can't cover everything. So then those dungeon crawl, if I played a game with a bunch of Dwarven Forge and 5th edition, I could make an epic version of HeroQuest. Yeah. And you don't have as many limits on things, which is nice. Yeah, I think there's and the way I feel about, and I was thinking about this while you're saying this, the way I feel about dungeon crawling is it's like a sandwich. You know that there's going to be certain components to a sandwich. There's going to be bread, and there's probably going to be a meat unless you're vegan or something. There's going to be probably cheese or lettuce or something, and there might be all sorts of different combos. There might be stacks and stacks of layers, or it might be cheese sandwich. But what you're going to get. It's a very consistent type of experience, and it's why it's pretty popular is because it's people do tend to like consistency, and when you can provide a consistent experience outside of just your group dynamic, I think that has an appeal that is very broad and sells very well, as we can see with D&D. And
it's easier to GM, right? Like because you also can just get a module and run it.
I have some over here,
right? And let me point out, there's nothing wrong with that, right? But I also think, and I'm trying to work it out, right? Because I'm thinking about some of the appeals, and I'm thinking about how if you're really in it, right? If you're in a real dungeon crawl with a killer DM who's fair, right?
Right.
Harsh but fair.
Right.
There's a real sense of personal accomplishment if you beat the dungeon.
And this goes back to a conversation I had, I think, with you and maybe some other people on different Discords. And I think you had this a little bit with Anna last time. It's about video gaming. So you and you put your quarter in.
Yeah.
Get that many lives. And if you flub it, then it's going to cost you another quarter. Yep. And you better master the systems in which are in place in order to progress. And there's a certain level of pride that comes from system mastery that I've mastered this level in Mario. I can get through this one. Now let's go to the next one.
Yeah.
I haven't died. I haven't, as many times as it takes, just batter it, playing over and over and over again until your thumbs are numb or whatever.
Yep.
And I think that type of experience has faded, right? So it's not, video games now are not what they were back then. For good or ill, there's certain video games that do throw back to that. That's fine. Variety is a spice of life, so we have to have it. But the limitations back then required them to have games that were difficult. Otherwise, you would beat them. And then why would you recommend that game to your friends?
That's right.
Why would you be excited and tell your friends, I beat the fire boss on Mega Man. Mm-hmm. I beat him without any, I didn't even take any damage. Mm-hmm. I hopped around. I had him down. And you would tell your friends and they're like, oh, okay. Well, I got to go buy that Mega Man game. That's amazing. That sounds like a lot of fun. And then they would beat themselves to death, trying to figure it out. And that mentality goes along with what the AD&D was. Then I got 3 hit points. I better make the daggone most out of those 3 hit points because there's no coming back. I'll restart maybe another character eventually, but and that mentality has faded to an old school type of mentality type of thing too. And it's interesting. It's always interesting to me the trends that go along with things.
Mm-hmm. This is interesting because you just said something that made me ping in my mind something else, and that was about the quarters.
Yeah,
and about system mastery with Dungeons and Dragons. People they get the mastery in Dungeons and Dragons and they don't want to play any other system.
Right.
Let's go back to the arcade, and you've got your quarter. Mm-hmm. So you've been playing a lot of Pac-Man.
Right.
You're not to the point where you can flip it, right? But you've been putting quarters in consistently. Right. Now, are you going to put your quarter down to get in line for Pac-Man, which you can play for a good 15 minutes because you're really good at it now? Right. Or are you going to put your quarter in Paperboy, which you've never played, and you're probably going to lose immediately, and your game time is going to be very small. So there's a way in which the sort of the grind of it and the skill that you build up. For me, it was Tron, Mario Brothers. Those were the 2 that I spent a lot of time on. And so then I want to keep playing those games because I get to play longer with them.
Right.
because I know them.
And you get to show off to all these other
Yep.
people that might not have the same system
Yeah.
mastery as you. And look at
Yep.
me, I can get to this level, you know. Or you
Yeah.
are enthralled by the thought that somebody else has mastered it even more than you, and he put a quarter in, and it's there almost all the time that you had. And oh man, am I
Yeah.
even going to get to play this guy?
Yeah. And then of course, what's amazing about those levels, I mean, I remember it when you're watching people play Mario Brothers, and like first it's turtles, then it's crabs, then I think you get ice flows, or ice flows might be four. There might be something before.
There's the spiky guys, I think.
Yeah, the spiky guys.
I can't remember when those. Yeah, it's been a long time since.
But like, the first time I saw the ice flows, I was like, "What?"
Yeah.
Right? Because it's like, and I think that like because each level is a little bit different,
Right.
that you start getting like it's exciting to see somebody who's a little bit better than you, so you can see a level you've never seen before, or then you can show off, "Oh yeah, I can get to the ice flow." You know what I mean?
Well, and then they had those games that were PvP, like Joust.
Oh my gosh, Joust. See you, Krellin, by the way.
Yep, see, bye. You know, Joust had its own skill set that was just like I would watch people that were good at that just beat new rival.
Oh my gosh.
And their system mastery was superb. And it's just like they had that game down, you know, and they put one quarter in and
Mortal Kombat,
Street Fighter.
All,
you know, I don't know this character, but I might know, you know, Raiden on, you know, on
Did you
Mortal
play
Kombat.
Kung Fu?
I had Kung Fu on Commodore 64. It was one of the few games I had.
Nice. Yeah, and so, and I actually, this is really interesting because if you think about it, if you're wanting to sort of put the trend of video games and RPGs together, and there is a real synergy between the arcade style of video game and Dungeons and Dragons back in the day. And if you look at a lot of the video games now, we're getting really narrative-based video games where you don't die in that way. We have save points.
Right. We have video games that aren't. You can almost not call them games because they're almost a book that's visually represented. It's kind of those. I remember watching. I think it was like Kevin Smith or something gave a speech, and he was talking about how the film industry is changing and evolving to the needs of the viewer, and that the viewer interaction in the future had to be more interactive than just a visual watching type thing. And video games have kind of done that. Now you can play through a book, basically. You might have some dialogue or stuff and some choices that you make, kind of choose your own adventure type of deal like we had back in the day. But now it's all visually represented. There might not be a lot of points of failure, right? So there might not be, just like the narrativist in RPGs, there might not be a point where there might be save points. There might not be. It just might auto save, and you just, you know, oh well, you didn't hit the thing, so hit the thing now, okay, and then you hit the thing, and then it goes on to the next story point. So.
Yeah, Drummer Boy was saying that this plays into Twitch culture now. You can watch all the people better than you, and then try it yourself on Steam or not. Yeah,
right.
And it's so funny because you're thinking about it, because I'm really sort of fascinated by this thought, because I'm thinking about these different trends, and I was thinking about how we did have these story-heavy games back in the day. But do you remember playing? I don't know if you played, but it was Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Leather Goddess of Phobos, like these sort of interactive fiction games.
The Maniac Mansion type of point-and-click adventure type of things.
Just all text-based.
Oh, so like Zork.
Yes, but the ones where like it was all like pick up cat. I'm sorry, there's no cat here. You're like, but okay. Pick up kitten. You pick up the kitten. All right. So that's what you wanted me to say. Like where the whole thing was like weird guessing what language you had to use to get stuff happening.
Yeah, I had Zork. That was the one. Open door, you know, door is locked. Okay. Unlock door, you know, and then it's like door is now, well, go through door. No, the door is closed. Oh, open door. It's like, okay, yeah, that's fine now. All right, I figured out what the little term is that it needed to do the things in order.
People would never put up with that today. They would not put up with that today. Oh my!
In the popular culture, no. I think there's a segment of the population that still enjoys that kind of experience. You know, there's and I talked about this on the retro show way back. There is a vast it's kind of the OSR of video games is retro gaming, right?
Yeah.
So but retro gaming has a lot of good things about it that the OSR needs to probably
work
follow. On because it doesn't focus on just one genre, one system, one anything. It's, you know, they have 8-bit games, you have you know, I was watching a show the other day, and somebody made a brand new Sega Genesis game, a brand new Atari game. People are making cartridges for things that existed. Commodore 64 game a guy had just sold 400 things for.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, like, it can't just be nostalgia. It can't, couldn't have that success if it was just nostalgia. You can have a limited success with nostalgia, but it goes beyond that, where people want to experience the things past.
But so here's the thing. I've got to. I know we're going to leave soon, but I have to say this is really important.
I've got all night, actually. So
it is nostalgia, and what I've noticed, and this is the thing that I think is fascinating. Whenever you bring up the word nostalgia, OSR people are like, "No, it's not nostalgia. It's not nostalgia at all. It can't be nostalgia because I wasn't born then." I was like, "You can be nostalgic for a time period you weren't born in, and nostalgia is not necessarily bad, right? Like nostalgia is not necessarily like creepy nostalgia is bad, but nostalgia in itself is not necessarily a bad thing." I'm personally not very nostalgic because I grew up in the 80s and was kind of bad then. But, right, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly.
So
I have a certain nostalgia for certain things that I enjoyed from then, but all the bad stuff, I'm like, yeah, you can leave that back there. I have no desire
for it.
Those components at all, yeah.
But the thing is, and I think that it's it's important not to... they're really it's a reflex. Be like, no, there's no nostalgia. And I was like, you're calling it the old school Renaissance. Of course there's a nostalgia, but that's not necessarily bad. It's not necessarily a bad thing to sort of want to say, you know what, I really want to, I want to play a game that has this style that we don't really do anymore. Like, I mean, people are still doing interactive fiction games. Every year there's like and it's not bad. It's only bad if you're being creepy. In the same way, only liking new things can be bad if you're doing it in a creepy way. Like if you reject everything that happened in the past, that can also be bad. Like there's, you know what I mean? And I think that...
or if you bring in certain mindsets from the era in which those things were made that are not acceptable in today's society.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Like, what are you doing? Especially, and I think what's also interesting, for me, what I don't like is when what people do is they actually lie about the past, right? When people are like, well, but in the 80s, it was totally fine to do XYZ. And I was like, well, not everybody thought that, actually. I was there, and not everybody thought that XYZ was cool.
Rural Kentucky, a lot of things that were maybe okay, even in New York City, were not acceptable in the slightest.
So, right? And kind of recognizing that, in different parts of the country, different things were acceptable. And I think that for me, that's the one thing I really dislike, is when people flatten the past because a lot of people are dead now. So they can be like, oh yeah, in the past it was all like this. And I was like, no, it's never all like anything. There's it wasn't just D&D even in the beginning, right? Like, sure, D&D was the first, but very quickly there were other things. And even D&D, Arneson and Gygax were different, right? So recognizing that it's not just one thing in the past, so that we can, it's like those people, right, who are like, well, that thing that just was running around, whether they only wanted to have only white men in their medieval fantasy game. Because
this is the second time now it's happened.
Because that's historically realistic. And I was like, well, oh, hold on, that's not historically realistic at all. Like, you don't know your history.
No.
Yeah.
And there's going to be push and pull in that, and until there's a societal kind of change in that direction, there's going to, and that's the only way to kind of alter that, is to accept the good parts and tell people that are having the bad parts no.
And like, being upfront about what some of the, like, I'm going to tell you, you want to know what is a bad thing about AD&D 1E?
What's that?
A really bad thing that I'm glad we don't have so much anymore. I mean, we still have it sometimes. The really bad editing. Like,
you and Anna talked about that last time. I'm like, oh my God, so much. It's
so bad. No indexing. Like, I mean, there was like tables of contents that made no sense. Like,
parts that are out of order for what would mentally be, okay, I have to make a character in these steps, but now I'm putting step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, step, and you wonder why people of that era indexed all their books and had the little tabs and everything. And that's why I think Levi has even done it with 5th edition. Like, he's got one that's because 5th edition is still not great about it.
I know, I'm just saying.
Why isn't it race backgrounds class? No, it's, you kind of have to figure out what the guy maybe, or the gal did, or whatever, before you figure out, now they're a cleric, or like my son's ex-pirate, is now a cleric. Well, kind of has to happen in an order.
Right? Yeah. Dermot was saying that even the new hot game on Twitch, Ritual of the Night, is basically Castlevania Symphony of the Night too. Yeah. And Sea Spider is like, most people look to ways not the same as acceptable. That is also true and very important. And there are actually some things that we're more cool with now that were not acceptable then. Like it's not only progress, it's a very complicated thing. And of course Krellin's like, Dude, Mali was the richest place on earth in the Middle Ages.
Yeah,
Everybody knew about
right.
it, and all the kings wanted, want to be like King of Mali. Hey,
Right.
Volpez, and yeah, internet cheat sheets, and I think just being more, because Levi was saying that, like, Levi's like, yeah, the internet, I like it, right? Like I mean, I was just thinking about the other day about typewriters. You know, manual typewriters are really bad for carpal tunnel. I'm really glad that I have nice keyboards.
It's funny you said that because I was listening to you type your tweet out earlier,
Yep.
and I was like, he bangs on the keyboards as much as I do,
Yeah.
and I'm like wondering if that's because we all learned on these things where you had to hit them that
Yeah.
hard in order for them. And like my wife is she hates it because I got a mechanical keyboard and I have to close the door because I'm like I'm might as well be in here with a sledgehammer on the keys. And she's like, "Why do you type this?" Because I learned on a manual keyboard where you had to hit the key to make it hit the paper. You know, however hard you hit it was, and she's like, "That's wild." And you know, I watch my daughter type, and she's just like, "It's barely any noise," and then we're listening.
Seems better. Like, I call it keyboard aggro. And here's the thing: I had a mechanical keyboard, but I was like, "Oh, if I'm streaming, I cannot use that mechanical keyboard because it'll be way too loud." So I switched back to this one. But you remember like the kind of strength you need in your pinkies to get those
right. Well, and slamming that space bar, which I mean, just absolutely hitting it. I wore out one keyboard already because it just the spring could not keep up with me. Thing down. It's funny. It's
and I'm just gonna say that wasn't good for us. You know what I mean? Like and oh, hey, do you remember whiteout or having to retype an entire page? I'm really glad that I'm happy about many things that have
trying to backspace enough to where you fit that letter that you got wrong on top of the whiteout that you like had to blow dry while it's still in the roll. Yeah, no, I know all about that. Yeah.
And I'm just glad, right? And so like
that's nostalgia that doesn't need to have. I don't need to have that again.
I don't need that. I don't need that.
I'm fine with yeah. And those are and that's a very minor thing. Like, you know, compared to like a lot of other wrongs that have happened in the past,
but we're like just a little minor thing,
little things, you know, and nobody thinks of that. You know, I've seen like the hipster thing where they're bringing those. I'm like, why would you do that? Why would you bring out the mechanical keyboard?
Like, oh, come on. And they're like, but they're so real. It's like, they're really irritating.
They're really dumb. Yeah.
I mean, I think about how much easier. And actually, going back to the bad editing of D&D 1E.
Oh, that's what we kind of got sidetracked.
No, but this is related. Yeah. Can you imagine how much easier it is to put out your own RPG book now than it was then? Now we have spell check, right? Now you can actually
have Kickstarter. Yeah. I mean, oh my God. Kickstarter just changed everything as far as that. Oh my goodness. Think about the typefacing that we had to deal with AD&D in early games. I mean, even in this one I've got here, sometimes it's a little funky, you know, the art and stuff. They didn't have this plethora of artists, you know, banging at doors because you didn't know all these different artists. You had to put an ad out in the paper and maybe some guys show up locally, you know, or and then you can interview them or whatever. But there wasn't the vast, you know, you could get art over the internet and never meet the person that made it.
Do you know what's so interesting thinking about this, about the ways in which the modern, I mean, of course, the obvious thing is Twitch, right? The obvious, and not just Twitch, but Zoom, being able to play on the internet is like the obvious thing.
Roll20, all that good stuff,
Which is amazing. But also I think about not just that. Think about back in the day, you had your fanzine, which was then mimeographed or photocopied and then sent. Yep. Now you can make connections with people so much easier. You have forums. You can build communities much easier. You can find other people who are like you. But then also, if I was like, hey, I don't really know exactly how this rule works,
you can ask them a question.
I can just ask online and find out how to do it in a way that's not going to take a couple months for it to hit Dragon Magazine. You know what I mean? Like, it's pretty amazing.
I can tweet at the guy that made the game, and he can answer within seconds if he notices and desires to answer my post. Or somebody else might see that tweet and go, "Hey, you know." It's funny because I'm slowly reading my way through this book. I think it's called "Playing the World" or "Playing the Game."
Oh, I've heard that one. Playing at the World.
Maybe it is. It's upstairs. Anyway, it's basically a documentary or a in sequence what happened with D&D and Gygax. And at one point, Gygax put out in flyers little want ads saying players wanted for this game with, you know, in his area and everything. to try out this, or wants to play medieval, style fantasy war
Yeah.
games. And that was how you met people.
Yeah.
It was that and going to conventions if
Yeah.
you were lucky enough to afford to be able to do that. And it was an afford thing. I mean,
Yeah.
the hobby was not, you had to create a lot of stuff on your own,
Yeah.
and everybody has this kind of rose-colored glasses that, it's very accessible. No, not really. You had to kind of order off. It was something not everybody had a bunch of money for.
Mm-hmm.
The rules were kind of obscure and weird, and you might not have those access to those special dice that they need. And
yeah, where are you going to get them, right?
I mean, even in my day, like getting dice that weren't D6s was like you had to go to the hobby shop to
Yeah.
get them, or you had to order them. I remember
Chessex.
miniatures.
Yeah.
Even when I wanted official Warhammer miniatures, I had to convert my money. And this is me at like 13, 14 years old, converting my money to British pounds
Yeah.
to send overseas and figure out the shipping to get it back to me.
Yeah.
All within a magazine, and me sitting here going, oh my God.
And there's the crit, which was talking about the art for first edition Werewolf. You're like, oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
and then of course, wikis are the new zine. And I just think about the ways in which the communities, so there's this scholar, Benedict Anderson, who wrote this very famous book, which everybody cites him, but they only cite the introduction because that's the only thing that people really care about. And it's about imagined communities, and it's about the ways in which, so he said, like, he talked about the rise of nationalism, wherein before you had nationalism, people didn't identify as British, right? Because feudalism, right? So they identified as like being part of this town or this duchy or whatever. And then when we sort of create the nation state, we have to get people to imagine that they have the same identity as other people they've never met and never will meet.
Right.
And so he talks about the ways in which things like newspapers can help build this national identity, because you know that other people are reading the same newspaper that you are, right? So the ways in which media can create what he calls this imagined community. So you never meet the people, but you do the same thing, so you imagine that you're the same somehow.
You have a commonality that that tries to bind you together, yeah.
And what I think is interesting is that I really felt that way about gaming in the 80s.
Yeah.
That there was really a strong sense of imagined community, because while I didn't have some people that I knew there were all these other gamers, but I would never meet them.
Right.
But we all played the same game.
Right.
Whereas now you can kind of meet them, at least virtually.
They're not an imagined thing. You can directly see that their impact, they're posting on forums, they're posting on Twitter, they're playing games on Twitch, they're doing all sorts of things that you might not have even imagined back then. Like, I remember, and it was a very lonely existence, because you might know 3 or 4 other people that actually played a game, and they might not play the same game you have. They might not have the same mentality on the game that you're playing, but you had something to grab onto that wasn't just, oh, I like fantasy stuff, and it was a group cohesion in a small scale, but you knew that there had to be other people because there was a product. Yeah. There was something out there that connected everybody through a product, and so there's a little bit of weirdness with that, because it's the capitalism kind of dictating what a group is. Yeah. But it's a good thing in a way, because we had that. You had those imaginative kids that maybe weren't the super sports guy, and what have you. And
we do get the gist, Hrothgar. We get your typing. Yeah, and I think I was thinking about, like, I was introduced to Dungeons and Dragons through my babysitter, right? Like,
that's amazing.
Yeah, my babysitter was like, I remember my babysitter would watch me, and then sometimes she'd invite her boyfriend over, and they would play Dungeons and Dragons. Like, there'd be like a group of these older kids.
Oh, cool.
14, right? Who were playing Dungeons and Dragons. And I remember just watching them not really getting what's going on.
Yeah. Did those kids become the 20-something-year-olds later on?
Yeah, they did.
I was wondering. So that was several years that you got to play with that same group, and were you always the youngest?
Well, what was interesting is that I didn't play. So, like, she was my babysitter with that, and she said to me, she said, "You would make a good dungeon master." And then, like, she left my life, and I remembered this. I was like, okay, there's this game called Dungeons and Dragons. She said I'd make a good dungeon master. And then finally, when I was 11, I was able to get the box, right? And I played with people who were not them. And it was a couple years later when I refound them.
Right.
And I got to go into their group again. And it was interesting, because if I had not if she had not been my babysitter, if she'd not
Mhm.
said that, how would I even have known about Dungeons and Dragons at the time?
At that time, yeah, maybe you would have stumbled into it eventually, but
Yeah.
it's interesting thing how we come like I remember it was like Walmart or Kmart or something. I saw the Hero Quest thing. I'm like, oh, that's like the Hobbit book,
Yeah.
but like a board game. Why not? I like board games. Let's go, type of thing. And would I have had that product not been out? Where would I have
Yeah.
been? Would I be a different person because of the events in my past? And you can ruminate on that forever because that's it's waxing historic and whatnot. But it's interesting how those little things can sometimes lead to a discovery of a major thing that you enjoy in your life. So
Well, Drummer Boy says Gary Gygax would visit you in a dream. Pretty sure. I think that's how it works. Yeah, cartoons, right? That's it's actually interesting. I was thinking now we're talking about games. You were talking about Hero Quest. Mm-hmm. I had a game that was my pre-D&D game that was really important to me, and I wish if I wanted to buy it now, I'd need a lot of money if I could even find this game. Dark Tower.
I think I know Dark Tower, yeah.
It was this board game that had this sort of computer, this little tower. It was all LED, right?
Yeah.
And like you would...
steps that went around, yeah.
Yeah, and the little steps, and you'd press the button, and you're like, brigands attack you, and you'd like move around.
Yep.
And it was like the cool hip thing, because it was like computerized in that 80s way. But like that
electronic battleship, right?
Yeah, it was like electronic battleship. Or Stop Thief, that was another one that was one of these sort of like a little electronic thing. But that was basically one of these things that would like a gateway into D&D, right? That sort of like all those fantasy films and these little games that are happening at that moment.
Mm-hmm. A lot of the early 80s was like sword and sorcery type things too, and they were kind of building off of that. I think if I remember right with your Dark Tower, there was one step that like would flop you off or something.
And you're like, oh no.
Yeah.
So there's actually a question Jer wants to ask you. Which Hero Quest expansions did you have?
I had all of the US release ones, and I think it was you had the regular barbarian, and then you had the female barbarian. And I remember there was an undead one, and I remember there was one for the dwarf and one for the elf. That elf one might have been the one that was. There were a couple that were Europe only expansions. I had the ones that were in the US, and I remember at least it was the undead one and the barbarian. I think there was another one too.
Hrothgar points out that Dark Tower is $450 on Amazon.
Oh, I don't doubt it. Hero Quest itself, I think, is $100 maybe now too. It's pretty pricey. I was glad I found this one in a thrift shop in Seattle. And so I was really lucky. I found that and a treasure trove of old Warhammer miniatures that I bought resold to pay for the Hero Quest. So it was fun. There was dungeon dungeon! And I think. It was that one. I think that one was made by TSR, if I remember right.
Oh, maybe.
I think that might have been made.
Vulpus says they're gonna do a Kickstarter for a new Dark Tower, which is interesting.
It would be interesting what they did with that. Yeah.
It makes me think. I think about actually Mansions of Madness, which I picked up, which you'd use your iPad or your tablet to run it, and so I mean, again, I'm just gonna say. Can I have nostalgia for Dark Tower? Okay, sure, but hey, Mansions of Madness is way better. Like that's like
well, and then there's things too where they played on the nostalgia, but they made it modern. So like there is a version of Talisman on Steam that you can play, and it's just like and you has all the expansions, and you can buy all that good stuff on that, and they're pulling at that nostalgia.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you wanted to try to buy an original version of Talisman, I'm sure that's not to do either.
And it's funny because I was thinking about remakes, and I think this is one of the things why I'm not like, if you do the remake well, I'm pretty excited about it, because if I want to watch Beastmaster with Mark Singer from 1980s, like I could just do that, but maybe I could, you could make a remake. Like
see, I had my wife suffered through it with me, because I was like, I want to see all those sword and sorcery movies that were rated R that I wasn't able to see when I was like 10, but looked so stupid cool. And I went through and watched them. Oh, and they're terrible. They're all absolutely awful. They are like worse than worse. The sexism in them, not only that, but just the bad acting. You've got the bad acting part, and then you've got all this sexism and stuff, which is terrible. So and I'm like, I can understand these being popular for their day and how they influence things both in the good and the bad. Because it was all you had.
Yeah, that's right.
It was just all you had. There wasn't anything else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God, they're bad. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Levi knows. Levi knows. Me and Levi had a little discussion about how terrible some of those things are.
I was thinking about, like, of course, like the big ones, like the ones were heavy metal.
Yep.
And was it?
I was not allowed to watch heavy metal at all. Oh my goodness.
So here's the thing, because my mom was my mom. My mom was cool. She would get Heavy Metal magazine, and
wow.
Yeah, she had a subscription to Heavy Metal magazine.
Rad. Yeah.
And she also liked Vampirella, and I remember.
Your mom was super rad.
Yeah, my mom was super rad.
Yeah.
And what was interesting, it wasn't like I was like, oh, let me read these. I was more like, I don't think I'm supposed to be reading these, and so I kind of didn't. Like I would, like I didn't like read. Like I would glance through some of the issues that she would get, but I didn't tend to read them because I had this sense that they weren't for me, and so I kind of checked them out. But
you
I was
respected how rad that your mother was, and so you knew that would cross a line where it would maybe take that whole thing away. So I understand. Yeah, that's really cool. No, my parents were not. My dad had a copy of The Hobbit, and that's how the kind of everything started. So that was how that.
Oh, Krellin was saying that heavy metal was the inspiration for the zombies in Vietnam game he played, which that was a game he played with his group earlier, and that seemed very cool. Yeah, and the thing is, there were some actually cool things in heavy metal, but then there were some weird things in heavy metal. There's some things you're like, I don't know, because I'm 12, I'm not really quite certain what I'm supposed to do with this, you know?
Right. Well, and then there's things in it, I'm sure, now that you look back and you're going, ooh.
Yeah.
Ooh.
I remember this one story. Like, I remember it because I read it and I was like, what am I supposed to do with this story? And it was a group of 4 guys who were hunters. Like, they were friends and they would go hunting together every summer or whatever. And the one guy who was like the main character had a black coon dog that he, like, hunting dog, that was with him always. And they, you know, then you have this like shot of like the hunting dog being excited running off and them, and then at one point in time his friends came into the cabin and and the dog was sleeping on the bed with him, and like that wasn't okay, so he had to kill the dog, and so then he does, and then they eat the dog. And then it turns out that dog was a black human being. It was a black man that was like his dog slave or something. And so then you realize that this whole time they've been going out hunting, and they had this black man like finding the animals, but then he clearly was having sex with this black guy, and they caught him, and so they had to kill the black guy, and then they ate him as a cannibal. And I was like, what is this story? And I just remember thinking, I don't know what to do with this story.
Yeah.
And so I just was like, I'm not going to read this magazine because I don't know what to do with this. It was clearly about racism and homosexuality, and it was creepy, and I was like, I don't know what's going on. Yeah. But I feel like I need to read Heavy Metal magazine again. Like, it's about this, like, revisiting these things to see, like, how bad were they? Like what are the things that I missed? Because you know you missed these things at the time.
Well, it maybe you experience, you kind of got the edge of something, right? And then and you're like, am I remembering this right, or am I remembering this wrong? And you want to get that authentic experience to go, you know, is this thing that I like, okay, you know, is it really as grand as I think it is, or am I just, because I was, you know, 10 at the time and thought everything was kind of cool, you know, and experiencing things. Was the newness the draw, or was it really something that was great? And that's always a weird thing with like nostalgia and looking back.
And like, what did I miss? Right? Like, and I remember, I don't know about you, but I've had surgery before. And sometimes when you have surgery, you're on heavy duty painkillers. And then when I'm on heavy duty painkillers, sometimes I make poor choices. And one time I was like, oh, I remember that film, The Littlest Rebel with Shirley Temple. I should go watch it. I think it was super racist. So let me go watch it. And that was the one where she's like the Southern girl. It's the middle of the Civil War.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And her father has to go off to war.
Right.
And she's stuck on the plantation with her mom, who's dying of heartbreak. I don't know. And then she goes into blackface to hide herself as a little black girl when the evil Northern soldiers come. But then they realize it's just shoe polish on her face, but only because she had a lock of blonde hair. Anyway, the whole thing was terrible. But And I knew that, and that was also still true. But what I didn't remember as a kid, because I didn't see it, was how much they sexualized her. Like, she was young. She's like 7, 8, 9, 10, but she's creepily sexualized throughout the entire film. And I didn't even pick up on that as a kid. So it was good to rewatch it to think, oh, wow. This was like worth.
And that's when having that nostalgia kind of is a good thing, because then you're like, oh, okay, well, yeah, I don't need to watch that ever again. Or, that's not how I originally, my mind wasn't perceiving things that were maybe a little bit more upfront that I didn't realize. And I think that's kind of a good thing in a lot of different, like all sorts of media. You should probably, maybe if you have such a strong opinion about it, you should probably revisit it.
Yeah.
Especially if you haven't done it in a while and you have some kind of opinion. I've heard people say, "Oh yeah, Mega Man was the greatest game ever on NES," and I'm like, "When was the last time you played it?" Well, when I was 10. Go back and play it. It's the hard and kind of unnecessarily so. It was difficult because they were fitting a certain amount of space on the cartridge and everything. And
but then sometimes things will surprise you, right? So for example, I got into a kick, and I'm still trying to figure out how to turn this into maybe I want to run a little mini series, an RPG mini series. I'd have to think about it. But I got into this kick where I was watching teensploitation films from the 50s and early 60s. And these are made for teenagers, right? We're in the rock and roll era. But because it's a kind of a conservative moment, the bad guys have to die. Like, there's certain kinds of
the Scooby-Doo type.
Right. But in between that, a lot of interesting things are happening. And there's this one that I saw called Date Bait, which is about, like, it starts off with this girl and a boy, and they're dancing at the divey bar together with their friends, like these two couples. And then this guy shows up. He drives up, and it's Brad. And everyone's like, oh, Brad's back. Oh my God. And Brad, like steps up to the main couple and was like, oh, let's dance, Susie. And she's like, I don't want to dance with you. And then he turns to the other guy and he's like, I can't believe that you stole my girl. I've been away and you steal my girl. And she's like, you're wrong. I'm not your girl. And I never was your girl. Like, we went on a couple of dates, but like, and her parents don't like the fact that she's dating the guy she's dating. And they're like, you should not be dating just one person. You should be dating lots of boys. And and I was like, oh, that's not how we talk. And there was something actually kind of interestingly progressive, right, about the film in its own weird way. Like Brad's problem was heroin, by the way. So clearly the 50s was not as great as people said it was in nostalgia. But there was...
But Trooper, heroin wasn't a thing until the 80s.
Oh.
I mean... Nobody did heroin until the 80s, of course.
Right? Like, Emmy's like, I want to do an RPG about Reefer Madness. And actually, there's something really interesting about these 50s teensploitation movies, because the teens are actually a lot more interesting and nuanced than we give the 50s credit for. And so sometimes when we go back to these older things, we actually learn, like, oh, actually, hold on. Maybe it wasn't all just gross. Maybe actually there were some people who were doing interesting things, and that is also really valuable. It's
not all just happy days, and maybe there's some other stuff that's that normal humanity happened, and people make mistakes, and people
and there was heroin in the 50s.
Right.
Oh, sorry, Levi's like, heroin was invented in the 70s. Oh, the 80s. Sorry. I feel like it was the late 70s, because wasn't that when the French Connection happened? Movie?
70s, all the rock stars died of heroin, right?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
All cocaine, just all up the nose, right?
That's right. 70s was heroin, 80s was cocaine, and in the 50s, no one did anything bad at all. Everything was fine.
Yeah.
Right. You're like, is that how that works? So I think that's the thing, that sometimes actually going back to the past can surprise you with actually kind of cool things that.
Right. Well, life experiences for different people, when you really get down to it and you don't stereotype it into what you maybe learn in a textbook or with some media, can surprise you that humanity, has the same stories very often, even though there might be some societal differences, and, a different one story can happen now that you think, oh, that's new and innovative, and it's happened, and it's happened, and it's happened, and it's happened, it's happened, it's happened. I've been watching with my wife a thing called $1 Million American Princesses, and about how American tycoons, when the Industrial Revolution happened in the U.S., all these tycoons made millions of dollars, but they wanted these titles because, European ties and everything. And there was a kind of a bust in the UK at the point because all the nobility had no money because all this foreign wheat and stuff was coming from the US. And so they would primp and prep their daughters to be married to these nobles, so they would now be the Duchess of whatever. So you have like Diana has like ancestors that were US.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Churchill, his mother was from the US. That sort of thing. And they had gotten these titles by having really rich, like I think one of them was the guy who invented Singer sewing machines in the 1800s. He had like 20 children, and one of the one of his youngest daughters marries I think he was a duke or something, and sometimes they went really well, and sometimes they were just everything you want not to happen, with a marriage. And very interesting life stories, and those type of stories, while there's some components of them that are obviously of that era, like the tycoons and how women were treated and whatnot like that, some of them are very relevant today with marital problems and how people maybe value money more than they should, and how love can not always be associated with marriage, and that sort of thing. And so it's a really interesting life stories, and they watching those sort of things get my brain moving with RPGs too, because I'm like, duchesses that are not really liking their situation and are trapped and everything else. So
I mean, like you could do, and what I think is great about RPGs just personally is that you can just like steal ideas from everywhere.
Everything. Be a sci-fi movie and you could still stuff for fantasy. It doesn't matter. It's the way my wife and I talked about this at length one time. It says, writing and RPGs have a lot in common because and it doesn't matter what the setting is, it doesn't matter what the genre or what, it's all about people.
Yeah, that's right.
The best books are written about people. Battletech, I love Battletech, mod for Battletech stuff. If you just talk about mechs and you never talk about the people, it's the most boring book. The better books are the ones that talk about the pilots, and the mechs are just the backdrop. Because it's the human element, whether or not they're human, it doesn't matter. But it's that the stories of humanity being involved with each other are the ones that are the most dynamic and the most interesting. And sometimes people don't realize that, the best things that happen sometimes in RPGs are not the bashing in the door. It's sometimes the thing where you went back to the inn and had a long talk.
And those are these moments that have become so beautiful. Like, I mean, one of the things I think is what I love about RPGs is that you can have these beautiful moments and you made them. Do you know what I mean? Like you made them with your friends, these beautiful moments.
And sometimes they can surprise you. Sometimes they're not pre-planned. Well, I'm going to do this and that and the other. Sometimes, his character did this, my character would do that. Oh, wow, that's a really interesting, dynamic or situation or conversation that you have. And those are special because they're only for you. They're not pre-scripted in anything. Even the adventure module might say, that you do this and then this and then this. It might, the in-between bits, the area between the lines of text are the ones in which the RPG stories exist the most.
Which then, going back around to something said earlier, is the anti-capitalist part of RPGs. Right. You buy the books and all, but the moments are not. They're
not sold.
Yeah.
They're not sold. You aren't buying the moments. You're buying the opportunity to make those moments possible through a shared experience. And it doesn't matter what the shared experience could be rolling a bunch of dice a lot, or the shared experience could be playing Microscope or something, where it's there's not a whole lot of rules to it. And as long as you're having fun, that's the best part. It's having fun with people is what a game is supposed to be about. I think you wouldn't be able to call it a game if nobody's having fun. I think that's a chore, so I'm doing this because we're doing it, not because I like it. Is at the point at which you need to tell yourself, why am I doing it? Oh, this is my free time. Why am I doing this at all? And I've had games that are kind of, I'm like, wait, why are we playing that? Oh, okay.
I love that definition. That's the best definition of a game, right? Not like, is there a win or lose? Can you do this? No. A game is if people are having fun. Like, and then we're in a game. Otherwise, it's a chore.
Well, I think all of us have been in that game of Monopoly where suddenly someone's just winning and you just need to call it and you keep playing anyway and you're
Yeah.
not having fun. You're like, you know,
Oh,
you're almost at the point where you're just like, screw that person. They're winning so much. I'm going to keep playing just to keep them here because I'm going to or something. And
yeah.
everybody kind of just keeps playing because you want to see the end, but you should have called the end like, one person's got
Oh.
$1 million or something.
That's the worst thing about Monopoly is
It
that
is.
it doesn't end until everybody is completely destroyed. So
Destroyed.
like there's that time when we all know who's going to win, but it's another 3 hours before that happens. Like you're like, why?
The chances of it are reversing are just
Oh,
infinitesimally small, yeah, and it's just, or it's like Risk where you've got like one army left and you're just like, I don't care,
just don't like just
Man, yeah.
end it.
You've won
Just-
ended it. And those types of experiences don't happen with RPGs all that often.
That's right.
And so that's why a lot of people are drawn to them, is because it's kind of an open-ended thing. You don't have, there are certain RPGs like that Band of Blades, in fact, has a win or loss condition, and those are fine if you're all down for that.
Yeah.
That's great. It's cool. You win or lose together.
Yeah.
What is it? What's the board game? I'm thinking of Pandemic.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
There's a win or loss
Yep.
in that game.
Yep.
You all work to it.
Yep.
You work against the common enemy, which is
Yep.
the board itself. That sort of thing. And I think those have their own benefits.
Yep.
And if they're good, they're really good. If they're bad, Lord. Oh Lord!
I really enjoyed Pandemic. Let me see. Like I say, I got a group. We played through the whole thing, and that was really fun.
It can be really fun. But there's other games like Willie said, Monopoly, that once they get to a certain point, they're not fun. And
I think it's because it just drags, right? Like
I mean, there's the point at which it's the game hasn't told you to stop, and you keep playing anyway because the game hasn't told you to stop.
Yeah.
And there's a certain mentality that doesn't, okay, the game hasn't told us to stop, so let's keep playing, and then you keep going. It's kind of like I've had campaigns before where we kept playing and there wasn't really that kind of the story arcs that we had played through, and kind of the point at which we had been kind of completed what we did. Even the DM was a little bit clueless on where to go from there, and it was time to start over. And that happened. So.
This is actually why I like having seasons of a campaign and then re-upping, so that we're going to do 15, we do 15, do we want to do a second season? Yes. Right. Okay. Just because I find psychologically you get better attendance if people know that it's for 12 to 15 weeks, and then they can opt out, right? It's not like we're going to play forever. Right. We're going to play with no end.
And I've tried to run sandbox games like that, and they've not worked out because there isn't an end point. There was no goal that they gained, and it was just, you got it. It was, one shots are really popular with a lot of people because they, that they're only going to be a session or two, maybe tops, type of thing. And so there's the kind of an end point to it. We beat the big bad evil guy, or we've conquered whatever challenge is put in front of us. That's the gist of what the game is about. So I think there's a lot to it. I think that's why I'm kind of excited for Band of Blades, because it has an endpoint. It has a goal set forth by default.
I mean, I think the only way for me, in my opinion, for me, not for anybody else, but you do the thing, right? The way to make sandboxes really work well is to make sure everyone has goals. Yeah. If they don't have goals, then it's just, make sure the players have goals. Make sure that the world itself has goals. Mm-hmm. Now, what you do is up to you. Like, you get to maneuver how you want to, but there should be a sense of motion and momentum. Because what will kill a sandbox, what kills a sandbox is, all right, everyone, you're in the town. Go. What do you do? And I don't even know, what?
It's too freeform. There's not a sense of purpose to what you're doing. Yeah. And if you have to make that purpose up in a vacuum, no. You're kind of destined for failure, because it's a group activity, not a vacuum activity. So they can get hairy in a hurry.
Imp in My Head says that Saving Throw did an RPG using Savage Worlds based on the Mysterium board game, which I love that board game.
I don't think I've heard of what's Mysterium.
Oh, it's a real, it's a good board game. I like it because you can play it with up to 7, and I always need games you can play a lot with.
Mm-hmm.
So in it, one person plays the ghost, a person who's been murdered,
Right.
and the other people play the psychics who have come to the house on this one night, and they have until midnight to try to figure out who murdered the ghost. And each,
So it's like Clue, but not.
yes,
Right. Yeah.
it's like Clue, and so it's cooperative.
Mm-hmm.
And each psychic is going to have a suspect, a murder weapon, and a location.
Yeah.
The ghost knows what those are for each psychic, but the psychic doesn't know.
Okay.
And the psychics have to guess. So like they'll lay out a bunch of cards right on the table, and the psychic has to guess which one is theirs. And what they get clues. The clues they get are these cards that this ghost will give them. They will try to sort of indicate which one it is, but the cards are super abstract.
Okay.
Like a fountain with a bird on it, and you're like, is the fountain with the bird on it the baker? Like, and you have to try to guess as the and maybe you're like, well, this card with the fountain and the bird on it has a lot of blue, and the baker's wearing a lot of blue, so maybe it's the baker. But on the other hand, there's a bird over there with the hunter, so maybe it's the hunter. So like, you have to take those cards and try to guess what that might be, and the ghost can't tell you. They can just give you these cards,
right? Kind of decode what they're yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then at the end, once everybody has gotten their 3, then as a team you have to guess who the actual final person is. It's fun, right? It's I think it scales well. It's interesting. People have different strategies about how to pick those cards. Good one. Apparently it's like Dixit, which I've never played.
I have not played Dixit either. No.
Yeah. All right, it is 10. We gotta go. We're gonna call it with our lovely moment of talking about games as being fun.
I could talk for another 3 hours, I'm sure.
So good.
Yeah.
So I want to thank everyone who's been here today for being here in our stream. It's been really lovely. I'm happy we could share the gamer stories together. And I am most excited and happy about our guest, Barantor, who is awesome. That's all.
Trooper is awesome. We all know we wouldn't be here, right, together if it wasn't for Trooper. Well, maybe we would, but we wouldn't. Not in this. Well, no,
not in this configuration.
Yeah, not in this configuration.
Yes. So. Now, Barantor had a wonderful retro gaming show, which is on hold.
It's kind of on long hiatus. Yeah. We'll see if it comes back. It was Retro Talk show. If any of you out there watched it, you would know that 8-Bit Murphy, aka Jeff, was my co-host for that, and he got cancer and he beat cancer, and I'm really happy about that. We were scared there for a little bit, so we had put the show on hold. He is getting his life back together after getting cancer, because that's a big thing, especially in the United States. Yay. And so we'll see if that happens again, or it might be some other different format. Who knows? I still have the Twitch channel. It is still up there. It is still Barantor under my name, so if you want to do whatever with that, you can. I can't promise. Most of the time it's going to be hosting Trooper or Anna or somebody else. So if you want to do that, thank you, Critwitch, for missing me streaming. I miss streaming a little bit. It's my life is a lot more busy with teenagers than it used to be when they went to bed on time, and I had more time at night and stuff like that. So but that's all a good thing. Life has to progress, and so we'll see if I get behind the camera more than something like this again.
Because I missed your show too. I didn't get to watch it all the time, but I enjoyed it very much when I caught it.
I enjoyed it because we waxed nostalgic about things and then disproved our nostalgia by re-examining type of things, like kind of.
Like, that's the greatest. Like, I love that.
I do too. I sometimes when you question yourself, you learn a lot more about yourself through those questions than otherwise. But that's going off on another tangent for another time. But I am on Twitter under my same name. That's probably where I'm going to be the most of the time now. I do sometimes. I'm on my other Twitter sometimes, which I made for my Kickstarter, which didn't quite make it, but maybe I'll put Untold. It will be at LLC Realms. It's Untold Realms LLC is the full name. But if you go there, I'll sometimes retweet things there. I don't actively use that one as much, but we'll see if I get some of my writing projects done. That might pop up some things, good things on there.
Where can people find a link to your Discord?
To my Discord, I can give it out here in a minute. I can put it in the chat. Yeah, I have a Discord. It's semi-active. There's a bunch of knuckleheads on there, which I like those knuckleheads.
But there's some good RPG talks over on Barantor's Discord.
Yeah, we're silly, so don't hold that against us. Let me see if I can get I'll get the invite on it.
Because if you like RPG talk, there's good RPG talk over on Barantor's.
Yeah, sometimes there is. Sometimes we're just complaining about certain. I think this will work. That might be mine. Hopefully that's mine. All right. So hopefully I didn't invite somebody else. I also, if you like BattleTech, which I love BattleTech, BattleTech's a whole other story. Because that goes in the computers and then that gets, yeah. Anyway, if you like BattleTech, then Harebrained Schemes, which a lot of you will probably know Harebrained Schemes. They made a BattleTech game. We made a Discord for it. It's slowly becoming the BattleTech Discord for everything, which is nice. 8,000 something members now and stuff like that. I'm also on the subreddit for there and moderate on both of those things. So it has some good chats. Sometimes we have to smack a few people around, but it's got that little grognardy like OSR thing to it too. There's sometimes people get a little too grumpy for their own good.
Yeah.
But I'm on there. I'll link that Discord here in a second as well.
So that first link is for Barantor's Discord.
First one's for mine. Yes, I believe. Hopefully, this one should be for the BattleTech one. And if you like BattleTech, again, stop on by. If you don't, then maybe not. But yeah, and I moderate that one. It's pretty good set of people if you like BattleTech. They have a lot of other gaming stuff going on there that's related to BattleTech. There's some Shadowrun talk there every now and then, which is nice because they're the same company, Catalyst. Other than that, that's pretty much where I'm at. And around here, I kind of hang out on Troopers Discord.
And gives like good info. I realized that I should say who's going to be the guest for next week.
You should.
I should. So
who is the guest?
So next week, Little Red Dot is going to be here for Gamer Stories.
Good deal.
Which is exciting.
That is exciting.
And she is jamming me in the Purloin Code, and she's over in Atlanta, and she's a gamer and awesome person. So that'll be really great.
I thought she sounded a little Southern. I was like, I wonder where she's from.
Yeah.
And so now I know. And I caught the game last night. I was had it up on the big screen TV. Every now and then you're on the big screen TV. By the way, I don't know if you know this. Yeah. 55 inches of Trooper. It's
scary.
It's kind of, yeah. And it was a really good. If anybody's out there and has not seen that, or the Friday show I like the Friday show great a lot. So that's good stuff to watch.
And I'm excited to hear about her story too. So I'm excited for that one. And this is Wednesday. So tomorrow at 6 I'll be here for Night in the Woods. Friday at 2 I'll be on the Greyhawk channel for more Ghosts of Saltmarsh, which I'm excited about. I think it's going to be bad. We opened the door we should not have opened. I'm wondering how that's going to run. Yeah, at least I can turn some undead, but like, we're in a tactically bad situation, and I don't know if that's a lich. Like, I'm worried. I know what it is, but I'm not going to say. All I will say is it turns out it's not just Old Man Jenkins. There's clearly some actual undead here, and we'll see. That's bad. And then Saturday at noon will be Horizon Zero Dawn. And then Sunday at noon, I'll be running Cthulhu Confidential on this channel with Jackie Dash. Oh, wait. Here. Was it JAKIDASH? Yeah, I have a bell. There. Yes, because we have to have the bell. Have to have the bell. So my friends, that is it for us for today. Thank you all. Go and eat some food if you're on the West Coast. If you're in Europe, go to sleep. You're in Japan. What are you doing? What are you doing? Europeans. So thank you all for being here. You can join my Discord. I think Jer has already posted the links for my YouTube and my Twitter and my Discord. So take care, everybody, and I will catch you on the flip side. Bye, everybody.